The August 4th, 2020 regular session select board meeting, where we have motion to come back into a regular session at 7:20 p.m. Just to remind everybody that we'll be conducting this meeting via Zoom, and that pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, 30A, Section 18, the governor on March 15th, 2020 ordered imposed strict limitations on the number of people the various boards and committees representing the town of Grafton will conduct their public meetings and hearings via remote participation using Zoom. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted. Just real quick, just a little bit of ground rules here. I would just like to make sure that everyone adheres to naming participants tonight. Will name themselves within the Zoom meeting with your first and last name, please. We have a lot of people here tonight, so wait to be called upon. As chair, I will call your comment to the floor. Just another part too is that please don't be careful of sharing your screen. This is a public meeting. Anything that you share in the screen will be recorded and broadcast for the public to view. Just another additional ground rules here. Ms. DeFazio, our vice chair, will be managing the Q&A section of the function within the Zoom meeting, just so the public is aware that we only be taking questions and answers on agenda items tonight. So please be cognizant of that. In addition to that, we will have public comments that will be read by Mr. Roy here, our town clerk, and we'll also be reading in additional comments throughout agenda items and correspondence. Just to call everyone to attendance here, I just got to do a quick attendance, and I'm just going to go down the row here. So please answer in the affirmative that you're present for this meeting. Ms. DeFazio?
Fazio here.
Mr. Often?
Often here.
Ms. Roy?
Roy here.
Mr. Prisby?
Prisby here.
Ms. Meekins?
Here.
Mr. Lane?
Here.
Mr. Legassi?
Here.
Mr. Adberg?
Here.
Mr. McGoldrick?
Here.
Mr. Robbins?
Here.
Chief Gothier? Mr. Froston?
Here.
Ms. Maynard?
Here.
Ms. Kelly?
Here.
Mr. Mueller?
Here.
Ms. Govin?
Here.
Mr. Finn?
He has
Mr.
no
Magna?
power right now, last I knew.
Okay. Mr. Magna? Mr. Briggs? Okay. All right, so call this meeting to order. First up on our agenda, I have a few announcements that I would like to read, please. Bear with me. Last day to register to vote for the September state primary election to be held on Tuesday, September 1st, 2020 is Saturday, August 22nd, 2020. Also, just an update, the mosquito control personnel will be in town to hear concerns regarding mosquito control on August 6th, the 13th, 20th, and the 27th, and September 3rd. More information is at the Central Mass Mosquito Control Program website at www.cmmcp.org. The Grafton Food Bank, in partnership with the Community Harvest Project, will be holding a distribution of fresh produce for the Grafton Food Bank families of 2 or more people at the Grafton Municipal Center on Thursday, August 6th from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. This will be held rain or shine. For more information, please visit the food bank website at www.graftonfoodbank.org. The Grafton Library is in the midst of developing their long-range plan. Share your thoughts about Grafton and what role the library will play over the next 5 years. In short, community survey online at the town's Facebook page or visit graftonlibrary.org for more information. Just a reminder that a reclaimment event is planned for August 8th from 10 to 1 in the Municipal Center parking lot. Due to COVID, this event will be a little different than the past. Please watch the town website for details at www.grafton-ma.gov. And before we get into a couple of the other agenda items, I would like to allow Mr. Fazio to have the floor to read an announcement of the room. Mr. Fazio?
Thank you, Peter. So I felt strongly about giving a personal statement tonight about what occurred last Friday. And so I'm going to read a statement into the record. I did approve this with our council to make sure that I can do this without revealing any details within the guidelines of the NDA. So just so the public knows and my fellow board members know, this is not up for discussion. It doesn't have to be up for discussion. This is just something that I feel I would like to read into the public record at this time. So with the departure of the TA and the understandable confusion and questions that have followed, I want to take a few minutes to read a statement that hopefully offers some clarification. The town is entitled to know my opinion without revealing details and within the guidelines of the NDA. And my reasoning is so the town can move on with some level of satisfaction. I am incredibly disappointed and disagree on the process of how the board made the decision to enter into a termination agreement. I do not believe the process or how this matter was handled is in the best interest of the town. Executive session is typically used to discuss legal matters that could harm the town's interest if made public, and it can also be used to discuss legal or confidential matters regarding personnel to protect their reputation and/or privacy. But holding an executive session to shield the public and an employee from facts pertaining to a contract termination without cause only leaves this community with questions and assumptions. It's this lack of transparency conveniently enabled this board to make the decision without any public input. So I'm ashamed that this board can nickel and dime staff raises, begin a school year full of unknowns and unpredictable expenses. We passed an override during a pandemic and an economic downturn, all while conveying to the community that this was the only way to level services, but somehow at the same time make a conscious decision that terminating a very important and very expensive position, again, without cause, is best for this community. I believe timing is everything and process is important. To continue, I'm furious that our municipal staff were completely blindsided. Many, after working with our TA for over 12 years, had no communication or warning until the information went public on Friday. There was no immediate transition plan or ability for staff to ask questions. To put the town staff through so much uncertainty, I feel is wrong. I'm disappointed in board members who felt, rightly so, that they could not evaluate the TA's performance in such a short time frame of being elected, but could vote to decide to terminate a contract for the same TA. And I find that troubling. I am the only member of this board who happens to work in municipal government as a career. I bring this up because I have a perspective and knowledge of the ins and outs of many communities in Massachusetts and beyond, and that information I deem valuable. I do not regret the decision to try to retain a seasoned manager through severance and an early contract extension. We couldn't offer him a competitive salary to stay, so we offered him security. And the fault of the money spent is on the decision to execute the contract clause by terminating without cause, not the decision to retain the TA by offering security. So now the town is at a crossroads. We are a 5-member board, and I continue to offer my input and perspective as one member of this board. And there have been rumors that I am resigning from my seat this evening, and to set that record straight, it's quite the opposite. I will continue to constructively challenge my fellow board members when I disagree, but I will not impede in future actions. We have a goals meeting next week. We have a lot of extremely important future items to vote on. So that being said, social media slamming is not a good look for Grafton. The community deserves better. And lastly, I just want to wish the best of luck to Tim. He was one of my motivations for going back to school and getting my master's degree in public administration. And his passion for local government was contagious. I'm grateful for all he has given to Grafton. I've known and worked with him in many different capacities for the entire 12 and a half years he managed our town. As a staff member on many different boards and committees, as a member of the Mass Municipal Association, as a member of ICMA, and now as an elected official. And I've witnessed him lead with professionalism. He always had a vision to make the town better for future generations. I appreciate all he has accomplished, and I will expect us as a select board to choose wisely and who will follow in his footsteps. So thank you all for your time.
Mr. Chair, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Prisby. Thank you for that, Ms. DeFazio. I appreciate your comments. I want to move on to Mr. Often, who also indicated to me that he too would like to read an announcement for himself. Mr. Often, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also feel that I owe the public some basic context and some reasoning behind my support for entering into the separation agreement with the former town administrator. It's important to note that while this was a board decision, each member that entered into this agreement had their own individual reasons. I've worked with Tim in various capacities for several years, and I want to be clear that this is not an action that I took lightly. However, this board and the town administrator must work together as strong partners. It's essential for this board to have a basic alignment with the town administrator about the board's role, the role of the town administrator, and some basic alignment of management philosophy and a willingness to work together. Without those things, the town administrator and this board cannot be successful in leading this town into the future. As to the timing, once we entered into the discussions and it became clear that the separation was likely, it became important to move quickly to allow Tim and the town to go separate ways in the most professional and respectful way possible. I want to recognize the many years of service for Mr. McInerney. He served the town faithfully for over 12 years. He did a lot of good, and he deserves this board's recognition. So I propose that we draft a letter of thanks to Mr. McInerney in recognition for the many years of service. I have a second address as well. So I'd like to address the use of social media with regards to this agreement. I want to state that I fully support an individual's right to post whatever they want on their private social media accounts. However, as board members, we need to be held accountable to each other for our private actions if they reflect on the board or impact our functioning. In this case, Mr. Prisby posted a picture from 2015 depicting several former board members along with the town administrator. There was a comment made, everyone in this picture is now gone. Now, Mr. Prisby, this post was made one day after Tim's last day, and I find it to be incredibly insensitive. It's upsetting to all the people that supported him. These are our constituents. I believe it reflects poorly on us, and it undermines the credibility of this board. So I'll ask, please, in the future, that you please consider the optics and the impact of your social media posts. Thank you.
Mr. Often. And I have just one last announcement to make, and then we'll be moving on to our public hearing.
Carlson, Mr. Chair, could I just respond to that quickly? So, I take Mr. Often's point, and that's fine. And so I apologize if something that I said offended people. As some of you know, I do find public service to be a passion of mine and have felt very strongly for several years that there needed to be change, and with good reason, within Grafton town government. It's unfortunate that it came to the point that it did with this particular town administrator, and I too wish him well. But as you just noted, Mr. Often, that the board does have to work closely with the town administrator and that town administrator closely with us. So if people were offended, I apologize. I didn't mean to be insensitive about it, but it was something that I thought was worth noting. We've made great strides in Grafton over the past couple of years to increase transparency, to increase public access to government, to increase our ability to be able to communicate with people, to allow them to know what exactly is going on, and I think answer the questions fairly and accurately. I want to continue that work. Now, with regard to something Ms. DeFazio said about transparency, we had an executive session meeting and nobody in the meeting objected to it being an executive session. So I think it's unfair of you now to criticize your fellow board members and by extension yourself for not saying anything about that. Mr. McInerney was not terminated. There was a negotiation. He agreed to leave. And as part of that, there was a non-disclosure agreement that was signed that puts us on the defensive, because now in an effort to shield Grafton from the drama that I know a lot of people would love nothing more than to take part in some more drama, in an effort to shield Grafton from that, this is what we did. And we all decided to move on with that. And it's unfair now to come back and say, well, that was lack of transparency. If we wanted to do it a different way, and if Mr. McInerney wanted to do it a different way, he certainly could have. But that's not the agreement that was negotiated. Now there's an agreement in place. We're prevented from talking about our reasons, and we're compelled to move on. So my suggestion is, let's move on cooperatively. Let's go find the future of Grafton and try and work a little bit better in the future. And I'll do my part as well to make sure that that happens.
Mr. President, can everyone hear me okay now? I know there were some problems with my audio.
Yes.
I'm not
I
hearing
can
any
hear you.
objections. Okay. What's that? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, last announcement I'm going to make, please. Just want to read the public statement that was put out on July 31st, 2020. After some discussion, the town administrator, Tim McInerney, and the select board have mutually agreed to part company effective July 31st, 2020. The select board thanks Mr. McInerney for his years of service and wishes him well in his future endeavors. The parties have entered into a mutually agreeable separation agreement that is based on the previously negotiated severance provision in his employment agreement with the town. Separation agreement is a public record and available upon request. As this is a personnel matter, neither the board nor its individual members will be commenting any further on this. Thank you very much. And moving on, Ms. Roy, do you have any public comments to read to the record?
I don't have any public comments right now, but I will have correspondence later.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the first part of the schedule. We have a public hearing for a Class 3 license for JJ Junk Car Removal, LLC DBA ML Norwood Auto Recycling.
Mr.
I'll
Chairman,
need-
can I just interrupt just for a second? I'm sorry. We have a couple of Q&As, and I just want to remind the public that we will not be discussing items that are not on the agenda, but I haven't looked at those questions yet. But just want the opportunity to do so if it's okay with you. Okay, these aren't really specific questions. Yes, Jen Paluzzi, I can send you my statement. But besides that, there's no specific questions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Just a reminder for anyone in the public that would wish to have their public comments read into the record, please send them through the select board web, the select board version of the part of the town webpage at www.grafton-ma.gov. Anybody who sends any public comments to us or correspondence, we do acknowledge those and read those into the record. Thank you. Okay, so if we can move on to schedule a public hearing, Class 3 license for JJ Junk Removal Car LLC DBA ML Norwood Auto Recycling. Could I have a motion to go and open the public hearing?
I move the board vote to open the public hearing for the Class 3 license of JJ Junk Car Removal LLC doing business as ML Norwood Auto Recycling.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Mr. Legassi, could you mute your Zoom meeting for right now, please? Do I have a second for that motion?
Peter, what is the motion?
Could you guys hear me when I read the motion, or am I coming in and out?
I heard you fine.
Okay, I'll read it one more time. I don't have a problem with that. I move the board vote to open the public hearing for the Class 3 license of JJ Junk Car Removal LLC, doing business as ML Norwood Auto Recycling.
Second.
Looks like Peter might have froze. I don't know if Doreen. Looks like Peter is coming back in and Doreen is gone.
All right, can everyone hear me okay?
Peter, while it was frozen, I reread the motion and Mr. Opton seconded it. And it looks like Doreen might have lost internet there as well for a minute. But the motion has been made and seconded.
Okay, thank you for doing that. Appreciate Colleen. So I have a motion made and seconded.
Sorry, really quick, Doreen is here. She just has to grab another computer, so I'm gonna help her do that. Keep going. We will both be back in 2 seconds. Okay,
All right, I have a motion made and seconded to go into public hearing. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote. Ms. Roy,
Roy, aye.
Mr. Prisby,
Frisbee, aye.
Mr. Often,
Often aye.
Carlson, aye. Okay, I declare the public hearing open for the Class 3 license. So we have a representative from JJ Junk Removal present here to discuss the request for a license and answers and any questions that the board may have or the public. So do we have any questions that were submitted by the public? Ms. Roy?
We do.
You want to go ahead and read those in first? Thank you.
I apologize. It's not where I thought it would be. Let me, I don't have it. If you have it handy, it might be easier. I know they added it last second and I just didn't have it. I apologize. Let's see if I can.
Hold on 1 minute.
Here we go. This is from Bill Rowell, correct?
Looking, hold on 1 second here.
That's who I have.
Yes, from Bill Rowell. That's correct. Yep, that's it.
All right, my name is William Bill Rowell. I live at 26 Stony Brook Road, North Grafton, Mass. 01536 with my wife Shannon and my 2 children, Catherine and Megan. I realize any written comments on the Class 3 license transfer of ML Norwood Auto Recycling and JJ Junk Car Removal LLC was due by 7/30/2020. However, I felt compelled to write even though the deadline has passed. I'm going under the assumption that this license transfer is a result of the ML Norwood Auto Recycling have decided to sell their business to JJ Junk Car Removal LLC. We have been residents of Grafton and living in Stony Brook for the last 6 years, and our property directly abuts the land operated by ML Norwood Auto Recycling Facility. During this time, I would consider ML Norwood to have been good neighbors, keeping the noise at a minimum and not, to our knowledge, creating excess pollution in what has become a residential area. While I haven't been a resident in this area long, you can tell that the recycling center has been here a long time as houses have been built up around it. That being said, I do have some concerns regarding the transfer of ML Norwood to any other party. Those include, but aren't necessarily limited to, 1, will the facility continue to use as is, or will activity including noise and other pollutants change or increase, becoming a danger or concern to its neighbors? Activity is currently what I would consider moderate. This will increase 2 times, 3 times, or more. Additional pollution, noise, or otherwise will not be good for people raising families in what has transformed into a dense residential area. 2, will the town of Grafton or the state of Massachusetts Department of Environmental Management do any testing on the ground surrounding the facility as a required step of this license transfer? ML Norwood is situated on what I would call a gentle slope of land that runs down into wetlands that sits behind their facility and our property. I have to imagine that over the years, chemicals may have leached into the surrounding wetlands and groundwater, which would, in my opinion, affect what is delicate surrounding environment. 3, will car and or truck activity increase to the facility more than it is now? Adams Street, which is the street the facility is on, is already a very narrow street, and I'm not sure it could or should support more traffic, especially truck traffic, than it already does. I could see trucks also cutting through Stony Brook coming from the center of Grafton to access the facility more if the activity increases. 4, lastly, the town of Grafton considers that now the surrounding area is a residential area. Should a commercial enterprise such as an auto salvage yard remain operating in this area? Should the assets of this yard be sold to another party and the town allows nature to reclaim its land? I realize number 4 is not as simple as it seems, but I do think it should be considered as a possible solution given how the surrounding Adams Street area has developed into a residential area and possible long-term environmental concerns of having car salvage yard directly abutting a wetland area. Again, I apologize for not sending my thoughts prior to 7:30 deadline, but I do hope they are read and considered after the select board meeting that is taking place on 8/4 at 7 p.m. Thank you for your time. Regards, William Rowell, 26 Stony Brook Road, North Grafton.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have any more comments? Is that it? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think there were other comments. We had previously received a copy of comments from another individual whose name escapes me at the moment, but I think it was Matt Gilmeister.
Elaine, hold on one moment and let us find and track that one down. Stand by.
I have those in the packet, Mr. Chair. If you want, I can read them.
Yep, I see it. Go ahead.
I live on 24 Stony Brook Road, which is just behind ML Norwood and Auto Recycling. I have several questions regarding the Class 3 license transfer request from ML Norwood to J&J Junk Car Removal. Number 1, what's the reason for the license transfer request? Number 2, would this license transfer impact the current operations of the ML Norwood facility? Number 3, will J&J Junk Car Removal move its operations to the current Adams Road location? Number 4, how would J&J's proposed operations impact the surrounding properties on Adams Road and Stony Brook Road? And number 5, how will J&J dispose of waste from its property? Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone here, a representative that would like to address the questions for this public hearing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Henry Lane. I'm an attorney in Whitensville, and I do represent the applicant. And, you know, we're happy to answer the questions in a general way. And if the board members would like something more specific, we're happy to do that as well. Just as background, I suspect most of you are familiar with the location of the existing business and realize it's been there for decades and prior to my memory, certainly, and probably prior to the memory of many of you. Mr. Norwood, who currently operates the business, is about my age, actually, and is in the process of retiring, and is, in fact, as suggested, selling the business to Mr. Legassi and Mr. Moore, who operate as J&J Auto. With respect to the actual business, in fact, Mr. Legassi and Mr. Moore currently do a lot of business with Norwood because they're in the business of salvaging motor vehicles. So to some extent, the businesses are really being merged as opposed to anything else, since they're already operating from that site in the sense that they bring their motor vehicles to that site for recycling. So to that extent, it's not a real change. It's just sort of it's a change in ownership, but not in actual operation. On the other hand, Mr. Norwood, as I say, is about my age. So at the point of retirement, Mr. Legassi and Mr. Moore, the people who are hoping to acquire the business, are somewhat younger. And I suspect that they will, in some respects at least, change the operation. There'll probably be a little more activity since they're a little more younger and probably a little more motivated at this stage of life. But essentially, the operation is the operation. The primary function isn't going to change. There's constraints with respect to the size of the site, the amount of activity that can be done on the site, and just the amount of activity that's available to that kind of a business. So, we anticipate that the actual impact on the community should not be significantly different than it currently is. So, if you want more detail, Mr. Legassi and Mr. Moore are both available, but I think that's probably a pretty fair description of what's going on. With respect, I'm sure that people have concern about the pollution potential there. And again, it goes back some time, but the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection has been involved with that site for about a dozen years. Many years ago, we didn't have the regulations we currently have, and there was in fact a release of contaminated material on the site. And over the last 10 or 12 years, an extensive cleanup operation has been undertaken. And in 2018, about 18 months ago, the DEP finally signed off on the site, indicating that the remediation was complete. So, we wouldn't be buying the site if we thought there was a problem. And based on the DEP clean bill of health as of 2018, we're moving ahead. Currently, with the regulations in place, pollutants are all carefully controlled. The chemicals, the coolant, the transmission fluid, et cetera, are all captured and shipped off-site in licensed individuals who are authorized to remove that kind of material. Some of the waste oil is actually used for heating, but there's really very limited possibility for a spill or contamination. Not that it can never happen. I'll never say never, but the controls that are required are in place, and DEP is pretty vigilant about making sure that any spills or contaminations is contained and treated appropriately. As I say, the current owner has spent six figures dealing with pollution in the past, and certainly doesn't want to undertake that process again. With respect to traffic, Adams Street, I won't say it's, it's really sort of a rural street. There's not a lot of traffic on that street. There's very little residential development in the immediate neighborhood of the site. The Stony Brook project is behind the site, but there's really no connection there. And there's actually a bit of a vegetated buffer between the site and the Stony Brook project. So we'd anticipate that the impact would be minimal. And our analysis of the traffic patterns there suggests that it would be very unlikely that there would be any traffic that would be going through the Stony Brook project to get access to this site. We're not aware of that ever happens, and don't anticipate that would happen in the future. So, although Adams Street is not, the widest street in Grafton, it apparently has been adequate for the amount of traffic that finds its way to the site, and we expect that would continue to be the case. Let's see. I think I've addressed the question of the reason for the transfer, basically Mr. Norwood's retirement, what the impacts are going to be. There's not much I can say with respect to the town of Grafton acquiring the site. I mean, if the town of Grafton really wants to buy the business, that's up to the town of Grafton. We can't control that. I would be surprised if the town wanted to do that, but that's something you can certainly deal with. 'Cause So I think that addresses most of the questions, at least in a general way, but if there's specific questions, we'd be happy to respond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lane. If there's any board member have any questions?
Mr.
Okay.
Chair?
Mr. Austin. Mr. Austin, yep.
To Mr. Lane, what kind of ongoing monitoring is there to ensure compliance with, liquids and other disposal activity? Just to make sure that the business stays in compliance over time.
Well, there's reporting requirements. I don't know that they physically monitor on any particular schedule. As I say, I know over the last 12 years, the consulting engineer has had to file, I think, quarterly reports with DEP as to, the conditions on the site. What DEP's inspection regime is, I don't know, but there's reporting requirements with respect to the actual material that's generated and transported. So again, I don't know what DEP's what their protocol is with respect to random inspections. I can't tell you that.
Okay. And do you know if there's any kind of groundwater sampling or anything like that around businesses like that?
Well, as I say, that was all done on this site, and that was addressed in DEP's final closure of the original process in 2018. There was sampling done. All the potential pollutants were monitored and remediated until they got to the below the level of reporting requirements. So I'm not aware that there's an ongoing requirement to test periodically, but again, whatever the regulations are, we'll abide by.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Mr. Lane, I just have one follow-up question to Mr. Austin. Are there current monitoring wells there on site that are active today?
Yes, there are.
And how often are those periodically managed or monitored?
I don't know what the schedule is with respect to reporting on that. I know, as I say, I know over the last 12 years, it's been done periodically. The reports have all been filed. I don't know what the ongoing requirements are. I just know that they are still there.
So the reason why I'm asking that question is that this site is not without some controversy many years ago with respect to the Stony Brook residents in having some alleged issues with their drinking water. And I think this is a really important question, especially for new owners coming in. And personally, I think that the residents of that area, more importantly, Grafton, would want to know, how often are those testing wells being utilized and what's the schedule, and just to assure that the new owners will, abide by, those testing standards. So that's a question I have for you. And if you can't answer that, or if you can't answer it, please go ahead.
No, as I spent a considerable amount of time reading through the DEP records on this. My understanding that from a historical point of view, water was made available to the residents to address that issue on an interim basis. And then, as I say, over a 12-year period, an intensive remediation process was undertaken to remove any pollutants and to ensure that the groundwater was in fact, it tested so that any pollutants were below reporting standards. So basically whatever threat there was to the groundwater was eliminated through that process. I'm not aware that DEP has an ongoing testing requirement for these kinds of facilities. They basically address it on an ad hoc basis when there's a spill. They require you to hire an engineer and prepare a remediation plan, which was done. I'm not aware that DEP has an ongoing requirement that groundwater be tested, on any regular basis in the absence of a report of a spill. As you, I'm sure, are aware that the reporting requirements for spills are pretty intense. If there's any kind of a spill, there's a requirement that it be reported immediately both to the town and to DEP so that it can be addressed. But I'm not aware that there's any groundwater monitoring requirement on an ongoing basis in the absence of some report of a spill.
Anyone have any other questions? So there is a question from the Q&A, but just guys, anyone who's going to answer questions in the Q&A, you have to put your first and last name, please. So if you please do that, I'll give you a few more extra minutes to potentially ask your question. All right. All right, does the board doesn't have any other questions at this time? And I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I move the board vote to close the public hearing for the Class 3 license of JJ Junk Car Removal LLC doing business as MLB Norwood Auto Recycling.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor by roll call. Ms. Roy?
Roy, I.
Mr. Often?
Often aye.
Frisbee?
Jack.
Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Carlson, aye. Okay, motion, public hearing closed. Any discussion within the board? Want to go in, make a motion to approve or deny the transfer of license?
I'll make a motion if you're okay with that.
Go ahead, Ms. Roy.
I move the board vote to approve the Class 3 license of JJ Junk Car Removal LLC doing business as ML Norwood Auto Recycling.
Second on the motion.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded. Okay, any discussion on the motion of the approval of the transfer of license? Mr. Fazio.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to abstain from this vote. My apologies to the board and the public. I had some computer issues and I missed a majority of the discussion, and then my email crashed, so I had to just print out the agenda. So I don't feel like I have enough information to vote. So my apologies for that. I'll be abstaining.
Okay. Anybody else have any comment, discussion? Okay, hearing on all those by roll call vote. Ms. Roy?
Roy, I.
Mr. Often?
Often aye.
Mr. Frisbee?
Yeah,
Mr. Fazio? Oh, I'm sorry. Carlson, aye. All those abstaining by roll call vote. Mr. Fazio? I think you're on mute, Mr. Fazio.
Oh, DeFazio abstain. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, declare the motion carried. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming in tonight, Mr. Lane. Jared Lagasse, thank you very much for coming in. Good luck. Have a good one.
Thank you.
So next up on our agenda, I would like to move a couple things around here. I have the, I would like to move to new business B, vote to have board accept conservation restriction. Gateway. If that's okay, we can take that out of order. Okay, I'm not hearing any objections. Sir, Edberg, I'm trying to get you back here soon. Do you want to go ahead and give the board an update on this part?
Was that to me, Peter? You're breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, so we're taking that part of our agenda out of order, and this is about the vote to have conservation restrictions. Do you want to give us an update on that?
Yeah, sure. So this was the property that the town bought from Fred Churchill using $60,000 worth of CPC money in the 2015, I think it was October 2015 town meeting. The Grafton Land Trust put in $10,000 towards that as our interest in the conservation easement. is everybody familiar where this is in the Great Meadow area? It's off the corner of Miriam Road and George Hill Road. It's 5 acres in an open area. We acquired that. I did an audit of the conservation easements that the land trust controls, and I was surprised to find that this one had never been filed. So I went ahead and filled out all the form and went through the state and got it approved per what we planned on in 2015. And so now it's come to you. It's just upstream of the one that the select board approved for the Robinson lots that were purchased last year. So this conservation easement, the conservation restriction, is nearly identical to the other one. It has the same qualities of protecting water quality, protecting open space, and open space for the town. It abuts many acres. Let me see. The Great Meadow is 45 acres. Another piece of Great Meadow is 123 acres. Another 20 acres of land trust land abut that. All along Misco Brook watershed, which is the Blackstone River Water Coalition monitoring site, is on this property as well for assessing Grafton's water quality supply. If the board has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Anyone have any questions, Mr. Aberg?
Aber.
Aberg, sorry, I'm sorry. Aberg,
No problem.
been a long day. Any questions on the board? Okay, do I have a motion to accept and execute the conservation restriction?
I move the board vote to accept and execute the conservation restriction Grafton number 020 for the Great Meadows Gateway located at 120 Marion.
Second.
I have a motion made in second. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing none. All those by roll call vote. Ms. Roy?
Roy, I.
Mr. Often?
Often aye.
Frisbee?
Frisbee, aye.
Ms. DeFazio?
DeFazio, aye.
Peter Carlson, aye. Okay, I declare the motion carried. Mr. Aberg, thank you very much for coming in tonight.
My pleasure. Sorry it took so long.
It's okay, Phil. Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Okay, I'm going to take another thing out of order here. We've got some people here tonight for attending. I would like to move up to appointments in Board of Health vacancy. And right after that, I would like to also take out of order the Board of Health update, the discussion item under 7 section C. So I'm going to hand this over to the Chair of the Board of Health. Karen, do you want to present and give us an update as to the developments for this appointment? I think you're on mute. Yep.
Yep, there we go. It was just telling me I was on mute still. So thank you, Mr. Chair. So in terms of the appointment for the opening that we had when Deb Schminnard resigned, so we have one opening on the Board of Health. We have 4 active members right now, and then the 5th opening that we have, it's for a term that ends on June 30th of 2022. We had originally 7 applicants. 6 applicants that the Board of Health interviewed last Monday, July 27th. We met with each applicant 15-20 minutes, had a good discussion with each of them. Last night, the Board of Health members met again and provided a recommendation. It was unanimous on the 3 applicants that we wanted to recommend to the Select Board for this evening for the interviews that the Select Board will be conducting. And those 3 applicants were William Muller, Jennifer Maynard, and then Lisa Kelly. And once again, I wanted to thank all of the applicants. It was a wonderful turnout. And it just shows how much, sadly, the COVID pandemic has impacted everyone. But it also drove a very high volunteer rate for the opening.
Thank you, Ms. Bowden. So tonight we have Ms. Kelly as well as Ms. Maynard. Do we have Dr. Muller with us?
Mr. Chair, I received an email from Mr. Muller earlier today stating that he lost power, unfortunately, like several people, and he was unable to get onto the meeting tonight. So he sent, he apologized, obviously, but I tried to remedy the situation for him and I didn't hear back. So unfortunately, I don't think he's going to make it tonight.
Understood. In lieu of just not having one of the finalists here tonight, what does the board wish to do tonight? Does it wish to continue with this appointment or does it want to postpone to a future meeting? Ms. DeFazio?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I suggest that since we have two candidates here that the Board of Health has already approved to move forward with, that we go ahead and do that.
No other objections? Okay. Not, Mr. Roy?
Yeah, I would like to hear from the third candidate. It's not like he's just blowing us off. He just doesn't have power. I know it's a pain to ask people to come back, but I would like to hear from all three candidates that the Board of Health has suggested.
Mr. Often, Mr. Frisbee, do you have any indication which way we go, Mr. Often?
I'd prefer to hear from all three. Mr. Muller is a strong candidate.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Although while we have the Board of Health here, Mr. Chair, if we could ask them maybe just for an update, a general discussion about how things are going with enforcement in town.
Yeah, let me just kind of get to this next point here, and I'm going to take that out of order, obviously, while Ms. Garvin is here. Ms. Garvin, Ms. Maynard, and Ms. Kelly, I understand you guys are here tonight. We are missing one more person, and just the consensus of board tonight, and I tend to agree. I have all three here, and I know just related to the storm causing some power outages throughout Grafton town. Not everyone could make it to the meeting that was invited. So if it's amendable, I'd like to put this on to the next meeting, perhaps either next week or the week after next, if that's okay with you guys.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Fazio.
I just wanted to clarify. So I wasn't trying to leave the third candidate out. I just thought since we have two people here, does it make sense to interview the two board members and then interview the next board member? I mean, the next member next week, and then make a decision. Like do we need all three present to make the decision? If we do, that's fine, but we had to, prepared and have sat through this much of the meeting. Maybe we could interview them while they're here, but it sounds like the board is willing to wait. That's okay too. But I wasn't trying to leave the third candidate out. I just wanted to make that clear.
Any objections from anybody else? Okay, why don't we do that? So we'll go ahead forward with Ms. Kelly, Ms. Maynard, but we're going to hold off on any appointment until we give Mr. Muller a chance to come before the board and answer our questions. I'm going to go just in alphabetical order here. So I want to start with Ms. Kelly. If you want to give us an introduction, give us some background to the board, and allow us to ask some questions.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thank you again, Karen, for being here in the interview last week. And thanks to Jennifer, the other nurse, for being here. It's a little nerve-wracking, even though I've done a bunch of these before. So I'm really glad that we were given the opportunity to speak tonight and not wait till another time. So my name is Lisa Kelly. I worked for the town of Grafton for next month will be 11 years as the outreach worker at the senior center. And it's allowed me to help the seniors in town and the disabled in town. Our mission statement is very serious. I mean, very close to what the Board of Health is. It's about the safety and wellness of the townspeople. And I feel like for 11 years, I've been able to contribute to that. Before that, my background is geriatric nursing. I used to run a 44-bed end-stage Alzheimer's unit, and because it was end-stage, there was always someone actively dying, which required a massive amount of attention, in addition to 2 med passes for the other 44 residents. So I do have experience if we have to go for massive distribution of COVID inoculations. I could definitely help out with that. When the Board of Health opening came up, I was really excited. I felt like it was my purview, and although I'm on several other boards and committees, this was really my niche, and I was kind of waiting to get on. through my work at the senior center, I've made a lot of connections. I already work with the Board of Health. I work with the food bank. I have a great working relationship with the Grafton Police. The Grafton Nurses Association, the Friends of Grafton Elders. There's a lot of reaching out and teamwork that I do currently that I think that experience bringing to the board would be very helpful. So I appreciate your vote.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Does anybody have any questions?
Did I put on lipstick for nothing?
In a power outage during a tropical storm. Nice. All right, does the board have any questions?
So, Mr. Chair, are we gonna have both candidates kind of make their statements and then ask the same questions? Like, how is this gonna work?
That's up to you. If you would like to have Ms. Maynard go next, that's fine. I got no direction and how to go about doing this. So if you would like to ask Ms. Kelly questions or hold off, I'll give Ms. Maynard an opportunity to potentially, to give her statement, and then we can ask questions and both can answer at the same time. That works.
All right, I'll hold off then.
Okay. Ms. Maynard, do you want to give an opening statement, and then we'll go into questions with both you and Ms. Kelly?
Thanks everyone for having me. Nice to see Karen again. As I mentioned in my meeting with the Board of Health, I am new to Grafton. I'm hitting my 1-year anniversary, so I would probably be an outlier from many of the other candidates. Certainly bringing fresh eyes, and would be an opportunity for me to really get to know the community a bit more. I'm definitely trying to do that since, as I said, I'm new to the area. Prior to that, I lived in Boston. So, local government is a little bit larger. I have always been interested in an opportunity on a Board of Health. I served 5.5 years in the public sector working with the state's Medicaid system. And so while I was in Boston, I actually also obtained my master's in public administration, where I really got a deeper appreciation for local government and really what impact you all can have on the community that we live in. And although I've left public service, I still sort of have that pull to give back to the community that I'm now, hoping to have real longevity in. I've been a nurse since 2006. In addition to being a public servant for a number of years, my purview was in community-based nursing through home care and leadership. Currently, I work for a health plan and did have an opportunity. We remain open throughout this entire crisis. Of course, healthcare looks very different for all of us, Lisa included. So really kind of bringing the care to the community has been a big focus for us. Another thing that I've focused on during this time has been, I briefly oversaw a COVID infirmary where we saw only COVID positive people, not as large as a full nursing home unit, but a total pivot, if you will, in how we did our day-to-day care for our participants. So kind of having to change up what's happening, as you all have had to do, and the Board of Health has had to do a tremendous amount of transparency and education to the public. Has kind of been something that I've done right along in my public service through the state, as well as certainly now, where, as I said, kind of everything is changing on a week-to-week basis, especially when you're living and breathing healthcare. So was excited to see this opportunity come up, and just thought I'd put it out there to offer my support. And Karen, you'll be happy to know I did sign up for the Medical Reserve Corps. So throwing my hand out there as well. If I need to, if I don't help in this capacity, perhaps I can help if we need to do immunizations and things like that as well.
Thank you, Ms. Maynard. Okay. All right, so we want to begin. Who would like to go first? Ask questions?
Ms. Maynard, you're a registered nurse still currently, correct? Do you ever have to work third shift where it might impact your ability to make meetings?
No, yeah, my current appointment, I work for a health plan. Primarily, my office operates 8 to 5. While I was overseeing the COVID infirmary, that was 24/7, but again, more of the oversight, sometimes hands-on care. So I do have evenings available and more than just Monday evenings for once a month. So I can be available.
Ms. Kelly, do you want to answer that question?
Yes, absolutely. So currently I work for the senior center 24 hours a week, but since COVID happened, it's more like a 24-hour job. Not that I work 24 hours a day, but I'm on call all the time. So if the police call, I take care of it. If there's an emergency, I take care of it. If the senior calls, I take care of it, whether it's 6 o'clock at night or on a Saturday. But that doesn't mean I can't, do what I need to do if appointed and still solve those problems for the seniors and the disabled. So I absolutely believe I'll have enough time to be helpful in the position.
Charlton?
Sure. So I'm wondering for each of the candidates, how you would see the Board of Health interacting with the schools with regards to reopening, and then kind of continuous interaction with the school over time as they conduct, potentially hybrid in-person classes, and specifically how you'd integrate the and balance the guidance and directives from both the statements of state departments of public health and also education.
So I'll go first if that's okay with Jennifer. I would hope that the Board of Health would be happy to work with the school to give them guidance according to what the state deems appropriate in COVID, as much as the school would like us to be involved. I don't see that as a problem. I see that as an excellent working relationship.
Ms. Maynard?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a huge undertaking, especially for the schools. I have, seen some of the things that they have been putting out there about a hybrid model as well as a full virtual model, which I think is good to allow constituents who have young children, especially in school systems, the option. So I think, one of the ways we could certainly be supportive is to sort of look at what guidelines they are being responsive to and, bump that up against what their proposed plans would be. Specifically, I'm sure they're going to have to be doing a lot of social distancing, how they'll ensure adherence to mask wearing, how they're going to really support the additional sanitizing that would need to happen, sort of, again, align what their requirements will be from the school department and things like that, and DPH. I would imagine they may even need some sort of support to sort of bump up situations on how best to respond to that, because I think we could see by how some things have gone in other states that we probably will see some increase of cases despite the best interventions. And so, they may even look to the Board of Health and the Department of Public Health about how best to respond to that. And, again, modify that approach so that we can, if that does happen, slow the spread. Hopefully not, but we hope for the best and prepare for the worst is what we say. But I would imagine, agree that would be something that we would need to be supportive of, and be reliable to, review some other documents in the proposed plan, and even probably be present for families that have questions for us.
Thank you.
Else have any other questions? Ms. DeFazio?
Mr. Prisby, if the board doesn't have any more questions, we have some Q&As.
Does the board have any other questions that it would like to present to Ms. Kelly or Ms. Maynard? Okay, Ms. DeFazio, if you want to go ahead and open up the questions. Thank you.
Okay. So the questions are really the same. It's talking about board members who had Ms. Kelly as team manager when they ran for the board. Did they need to recuse themselves from this vote? Do we know if that's necessary or not?
We're supposed to read who the comments are from, just so that everyone knows who's asking.
Thanks, Colleen. Yeah, it's coming from few different people. So Terry Turgeon asked, should Ed recuse himself? That Lisa was his campaign manager when he ran for the Board of Selectmen. And then Karen Francis said, with Miss Kelly being the campaign manager of record for both Prisby and Often campaigns, should they abstain from voting for the BOH position?
If I may. My recollection of the conflict of interest law and the provision that might most directly apply here is the general catch-all provision, where if it appears that a member cannot render an impartial opinion based on a personal relationship that they have, that they should recuse themselves. Now, that having been said, we're a town of 17,000 people. And as we all have experienced over our decade plus of doing this sort of thing, you're generally running into the same people all the time. So if you're going to start recusing yourself every time someone comes in the room that you have a personal relationship with or that you worked with, there's going to be very few people left to vote. My recollection is that Joanne Duncan ran campaigns for other people on the board, and board members just voted to give her a raise, and she works in the administrator's office. I don't know if there's anything wrong with that. It just kind of is what it is. So we're not voting on anything tonight, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to call up ethics and see if they can give me an opinion on that. And if necessary, I'll file a disclosure. But right now, I mean, there's nothing pecuniary involved. Nobody here has any business with anybody else. Ms. Kelly was a volunteer who helped me, and she helped me very ably. She's very good at her volunteer gig. So that's, I mean, I don't think it's a thing for today.
Peter, may I say something?
1 second, Mr. Often, and then Ms. Kelly.
I didn't have any commentary, but Ed, if you can let me know what the basically what the opinion of ethics is, I'll follow it as well. Thank you.
Kelly, did you want to address that?
Yes. So Terry and Karen, that's actually a great point, and it's a good question to ask. I'm glad you brought it up. I think because I do have a very good relationship with some of the members of, well, all of the members of the board, they know me well enough to know that my priority is what's best for this town, not what's best for me and not what's best for their friends. So I am positive that these people will pick the best candidate for the town. And if it's not me, I'm just proud of them for making a good decision.
Anyone else have any other questions? Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. If Mr. Prisby can just let us know the answer from ethics, just so we know, moving forward, whether or not we're voting for board or not, that would just be helpful to know. Thank you.
Just as a side note, it'd probably behoove us to maybe get somebody in here to give us a quick refresher, because there's a lot of overlap with what we do, just with various people around town. We should know this off the top of our heads.
Anything else? Okay. Mr. Often.
Yes, just one last question to the candidates. So aside from COVID, what emerging public health challenges do you see in Grafton that will need to be addressed by the Board of Health in the coming years? And what skills do you have that'll help the board be successful in addressing those needs?
So I'm off mute, so I'll go first. So the EEE is coming up that will need to be addressed. There's a huge issue with vaccinations now. People not getting their kids vaccinated, which I'm not on either side of, but I feel that there will be repercussions from that eventually. As long as I've been a nursing professional, I've known that medications and vaccinations take years and years and years. So if a vaccination does come out within a year for COVID, we have to be very prepared for side effects because we're not going to know what we're in for. So 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, there could be some massive deadly side effects that we have to prepare for. This is a lot bigger than anything I've ever dealt with. I'm used to shingles and MRSA and other, other things, but this is unprecedented. A a lot of what we're going to do is going to be learning to go as it progresses. I could state some other things, but I won't, because the senior population has a lot of issues too, and I think because they're all cooped up now, some things might arise from that as well. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do. I mean, I'm not sitting here because I want to get on, I'm friends to get me on a board. I'm sitting here because I'm ready to do the really hard work, and a lot of it that's going to need to be done in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I agree with everything Lisa had just said. I think people are going to be fearful of a vaccine in year one. Who knows what kind of, we have a flu vaccine, but every year that changes, and who knows what other kinds of, she mentioned MRSA and C. diff. Those are super bugs that we as nurses have dealt with, but we don't know what kinds of hybrid effects we're going to see. We've seen that COVID-19 changes. And, it's not clear if it's just we're learning it, or is it evolving? And I think, we as the medical community have to stay abreast of that, have to really tease out the appropriate pathways to get our information from, so that, again, even if we're not sitting on a board, as clinicians out in the community, people turn to you, and you have to be ready to respond to those things. Social isolation for our seniors, I also work with the senior population at the moment, is real. Actually the risk to them is of course, as we know, greatest, but people are starting to let go a little bit of that fear and start to rebound back into the ERs. Our behavioral health communities have also been impacted by this. So people that struggled with mental health. One of the things we talked about during my Board of Health interview was also the opioid crisis. Those things don't go away. One, they're all over the place in small towns and our, close cities. So I do think that, we are going to start to see the downstream impact of COVID-19 throughout all the things that we in public health and any kind of communities have faced. So I think those are real. As we talked about earlier, I think, school nursing is going to look very different. Actual requirements perhaps of what, families are expected to do to enroll their kids in school may look different. Some of the things, so as I mentioned, I worked for the state Medicaid system under both the Patrick and Baker administrations in leadership roles. And during that time, Governor Baker rolled out a lot of his opioid packages for providers. So certainly been faced with a lot of ever-changing requirements, and having to go out into the public and explain those, understand the impacts that it has on them, as well as providers. I think we do have medical providers here in the community of Grafton as well, and they also are going to be faced with, again, unprecedented challenges. And it's hard for some of these smaller providers in town to stay open and stay sustainable, but they're also one of the probably safer places rather than going to a hospital or even a ReadyMed for care. So all of those things will impact how we kind of proceed, COVID-19 related, and again, other things that have not gone away in the time that we've been here. It's just been a little bit more on the back burner, for lack of a better term.
Thank you so much.
All right. I think that kind of sums it up for the questions from the board. I want to thank Ms. Kelly, Ms. Maynard for coming this evening. We'll have a future meeting set up where Ms. Muller attend and go through the same questions. We'll make sure we ask the same questions that were asked tonight. So I do appreciate you all coming in. At this point in time, a couple more weeks before we get to this. All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate Ms. Kelly. Thank you very much. I would expect tonight. All right. I wanted to the next agenda item discussion for provide an update on COVID and general health safety of the town as it relates to COVID. Can you give us, the board, just a general overview update tonight? I think you're on mute.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Happy to. So in terms of the number of total cases that we've had confirmed in town, we're at 102. It's been slowly, incrementally going up over the past few weeks, which is good because it means that it's slowed down in town also, although we didn't see any major spikes, thankfully, in town. And that 102 is the total, the running total, I should say. That's provided to the town by the Alliance. They're the ones who do the tracking, they follow up on the cases, they do the contact tracing for us and everything. So the Board of Health, we conduct regular meetings with the department heads in town, including the school department, emergency services, MRC, CERT, usually either Rep Meridian and or Senator Moore joins us if they're available. And it's just, we started this back in March, where we can have, just a touch point beyond just the Board of Health members meeting and discussing and going over things with the Alliance to keep the other parts of the town government and the community involved, keep them aware, to place a forum for us to discuss any complaints that have come up, concerns, how do we move forward as a town when it comes to something, say, as schools, etc. So we've kept those going. I don't know when they will stop, obviously, because we don't know when COVID won't be such of a concern for all of us. In terms of the larger reopening that we've all been experiencing, that's driven by the state. The state's the one who has the reopening plan. We're all along for the ride, for lack of a better term. Right now, we're in phase 3, step 1, according to the state. They've made no mention of when phase 3, step 2 might start. And actually, I know Governor Baker has been concerned that the cases have been creeping up a little bit in the state. There's concerns. Rhode Island just added to the not lower risk states effective Friday for the travel ban, or the travel order, I should say, not a ban, where you have to quarantine. So I know that that concern is out there, and the state is still looking at the data to determine potentially, do they want to roll back the state when it comes to allowing any type of larger gatherings, the restrictions they've already put on businesses, will they make them stricter? So that potential still exists. So far, they haven't said they're going to, but they've also been mentioning that they might. So we won't know, obviously, until the state says potentially we might have to revert back some. And if we do, then we have to. It's what the state tells us we need to do. Just at a quick high level, I'm not going to go into all the different types of businesses that can be available and open at this point, but think restaurants, parks, fields, playgrounds, hair salons, nail salons, spas, that type of places, retail spaces, office spaces. I will say all of the business types, all of the activity types that are allowed have state mandated restrictions that they must follow. And I want to reiterate, because there's questions around town as to whether those are Board of Health restrictions or state restrictions. They're not Board of Health restrictions. We, like pretty much every other town and city, are following what the state tells us we need to follow and what we, as the local Board of Health, need to enforce. So the state sets the rules, and then we're the ones who have to enforce it at the different businesses. With that being said, this is all new for us. None of us have been in this type of situation before, and I don't like the word unprecedented, but it's unprecedented times. So we've been trying to work with the businesses, the activities. We have people asking questions all the time. Can I do Little League? Can I do this type of activity at my restaurant? And it's always, if we need to, if it's not clear on the state guidelines, we'll go with the state. We have the direct connection to the state where we'll ask and we'll get the clearance or the guidance or the rejection from the state saying, no, you cannot do that at this point in time as a business. See whatever part of the restriction guideline. So it's, it's not easy, obviously, because the town is not staffed to handle following up with keeping an eye on every single business and activity possible to open 24/7 pretty much, but we're managing. Thankfully, we have the Alliance to help out with a lot of the inspections, follow-ups, calls to the businesses, following up on complaints, trying to help out getting, everyone to the point where they're meeting the state's requirements. Because the last thing any of us want, and I don't even mean just the Board of Health, is to have someone in town not following the state's restrictions and then pretty much, heaven forbid, be the cause of a cluster of COVID cases, for example, because they weren't following the requirements. If we, as the Board of Health, don't continue to enforce the state's requirements, then we're putting employees, citizens, and the town and the businesses all at risk. And I don't want that on my head, obviously, and no one on the Board of Health does. One other thing Governor Baker did say, and I know a lot of people weren't happy when he said it, was that phase 4, which is the last phase, which is the one that the bars that don't have seated food service, the larger venues, the larger gatherings, he reiterated not that long ago that that will not happen until there's a vaccine out and available, or an effective treatment that's readily available. When that will be, unfortunately, there's no magic 8-ball. Hopefully the sooner the better. But we're all along for the same ride, unfortunately. In terms of the town itself, I would say that the vast majority of citizens, businesses, activities are complying with the state's restrictions. People are wearing masks for the most part. People are social distancing. Businesses are primarily following along with what the state says they need to. We follow the process because the state also outlined not only all of these restrictions that we need to uphold, the state also outlined we'll call it a fine penalty escalation process, where you start off with the verbal discussion, a verbal warning, you go to a written warning, you go to a cease and desist, fines. Think the gym in Oxford that refused to stay closed when they weren't permitted to open, in the path that Oxford went down to the point of bringing them to court. So that's all dictated by the state, and we have the ability to escalate to the state if, pretty much we need to, if someone's still not complying. So that's kind of, I would say, all in all, I can't say I'm, seeing people, I'm not picturing like some of what you see in different parts of the country where people are having these humongous gatherings and they're all out, there's like 100+ people, no one's wearing masks, no one's social distancing. If that's happening, it hasn't come to anyone's attention. So I really hope it's not happening, because I think we are doing a really good job. Massachusetts as a whole has been doing a really good job, which is why we are where we are as a state, a town, etc. My thing from like the select board is really, just your ongoing support. If you do hear of a complaint or a concern, or you have a question, bring it to us by all means. And you don't have to wait, obviously, for one of those regularly scheduled meetings. Also, ongoing feedback, communication between the boards. We welcome that, we always have. And then just, continue to social distance, wear your masks, be, pillars of the community, and set the examples that you are when you're out and about in town, to help show the citizens and everyone that it's the right thing to do. And at some point in time, we will get through this.
Mr.
Yeah, I
President.
think you're on mute. Yep, thank you. Ms. Godwin, thanks for coming in. Thanks for the updates. You had described the, I think you said it was like a progressive process of a warning letter, a cease and desist letter, and then what was the next step after that?
So technically, we can bring them as a town to court.
Okay, so that would be the Board of Health bringing an entity, like a business entity, to court?
Yeah, I mean, we would obviously we would talk with select board, we would talk with town administration, town council. I know that's what Oxford did with that gym. It wouldn't be just us in a vacuum as the Board of Health going through. We don't want to get to that step, obviously.
Okay.
I would personally rather go to like the State Department Division of Labor Standards and work with them, because that's an option also, before having the town go down the path, because I know it's not for free, to go bring anyone to court. So, and we don't want to put people out of business. We don't want to restrict business, but we're stuck with what the state tells us we need to do.
Have you had to issue warning letters so far?
There have been a couple in terms of what we've seen in town. We've had one business get fined, one received a written warning after, the verbal warning. That's resolved. And then there was one that had received verbal communication and a written warning. The rules changed some by the state. So then there was further communication that we went to the state after the written warning, and the state had a conversation with the owner of the business. So right now we're in the kind of what we'll call a monitoring phase to see if what the business agreed to with the state is actually happening. If not, then we'll go back to the state.
Okay, and would there be a cease and desist letter at that point, or would that be the fine process?
That we would have to check, because when the state kind of took it from us, when we escalated, they gave them a verbal warning at the time after the conversation. So my assumption would be then the state might do their own written warning from a state level versus a state cease and desist.
It's difficult to navigate. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's been fun is far from the right word for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Else have any questions? Ms. Roy?
Are you guys just enforcing at local businesses, or are you also charged with enforcing at, recreation places like the beach, for example? And that fine penalty process that you mentioned, does that only apply to businesses, or that apply to residents too, that let's just say they keep going to the beach, for example, and they just aren't listening?
So the beach is closed in town. Doesn't stop people from going, even though the water's not being tested for other, potential bacteria. But yeah, technically per the state, we probably, we could, if we chose to, if we saw an activity, for example, let's say, I don't know, a little league or something was just totally going against everything that the state said they were supposed to, we could follow that process and have the verbal discussion, written warning, et cetera, according to what the state said. Would we go after an individual person? I'd have to look to see if the state even gives us that ability. Like, say someone was at, say, Silver Lake and consistently was going there, even though the decision was made by rec to close it. I don't know, without going potentially even to town council, first to say, could we slap that person with a fine?
Yeah, and I'm not saying any of that stuff happened. I'm just curious. That's all.
Yeah.
Questions? All right, well, thanks for coming and giving us that update. Appreciate those pretty well thoughtful what you said. Obviously, if there's anything you need from us, then read us. We appreciate everything you're doing and the work you have ahead of you. I know it's not easy, and I know it's very challenging. I'm respectful of that and appreciative of your work to navigate very unprecedented and uncertain times. So, if everyone's all set, I will say have a great night. Does you have anything more for us?
No, I do not, at least not this time. Thank you for having us in and the continued partnership, and hope everyone stays safe and keeps power.
We'll be following up with you in the next week or two on the final interview, and then we'll make your appointment. Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
perfect. Thank you again, everyone.
Okay, so we have a couple more guests here tonight. I wanted to go through a couple of these here. I want to take this out of order. I want to go to business session, in contact with MTO Housing Services Administrator and Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So we have Mr. Crossan here, who is the chair of the Affordable Housing Trust, and we have Mr. McGoldrick, who is our town planner.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to everyone on the select board. So I was here back in June, and we kind of talked about the need for rental assistance and what was happening there. For the folks who are new on the select board, I know most of you follow what's happening, but back in the middle of the pandemic, when the pandemic really hit hard, and we were all working from home and everything's getting shut down, it was immediately recognized that there was going to be a problem, especially with essential workers, or I'm sorry, restaurant workers and folks who were, they're out of work. They're going to be unemployed. So there was a lot of conversations about rental assistance and what could be done through CHAPA, Mass Housing Partnership. Our CPA reached out to me, and we had a conversation about the Affordable Housing Trust administering a rental assistance program. So we did some training. We saw some things. Went to some symposiums online. The major thing we came out of it was that you really need some guidance. You need an agency to work with to help administer the program and help you kind of develop the parameters around what you're doing, so that when you put it out there, it's done effectively and fairly, and has a degree of consistency around what you're doing. So we started looking around. I went on CHAPA's website, looked at some of the folks that were there. With the I think Mr. McGoldrick gave me the name of a few folks that he had worked with in the past and had good feelings about, and had a good working relationship with in the past. So I reached out to some of those folks. The firm that we settled on and seemed like it could be a good fit was MCO Housing Services. We brought them in for a couple of meetings to sort of find out how this would be done, and what exactly are we doing. This is not something that Affordable Housing Trust typically do. It's not something that folks do every day. So it was a big learning curve. And what we really needed was some guidance around establishing the parameters around the program, the income restrictions, all those sort of things, and then the logistics around how this is going to be administered. And that's essentially what MCO does. They've been in the affordable housing business for like 15 years or so. And they've established rental assistance programs for the town of Stowe and the town of Arlington. So, and I also appreciated the fact that they're located here in Worcester County. So we've had a couple meetings with them. We've developed the parameters around what we're going to do, what the program's going to look like. Those are outlined in the contract. So right now, the Affordable Housing Trust has approved the contract as it is, but in light of the fact that we're going to be tapping into CARES Act funds that Town Administrator's Office secured for rental assistance, it has to be brought before you folks. So what we need now is approval by the Select Board to move forward and get things moving a little faster. Once we do that, within a few weeks, MCO will be doing outreach. They'll start getting the process together for a lottery, and then putting some applications together. So there's sort of a need for us to move this as fairly quickly, and that there's a lot of folks that have been either unable to pay rent or for the last several months. So that's kind of where we're at. I just need you folks to approve this, and then we can move forward with this.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Crossan. Appreciate it. Mr. Prisby.
Why do we need to approve this? Because the trust is going to use CARES Act money. The trust is an independent agency by statute. If money is being directed to it from the administration, that's fine. But that doesn't give the administration control over projects.
Mr. Carlson, Chairman, if I may.
Mr. McGoldrick, please.
So in drafting the contract, we initially were just going to contract with Affordable Housing Trust, and while discussing that with staff internally, it was noted that it is, being a contract with the town entities and MCO Housing, that the Select Board should be a assignee on that, and so that's why we brought it before you tonight as well.
But why?
Mr. Prisby, I can answer that question. Mr. McGoldrick, yes. So I looked into this tonight for tonight's meeting, and the reason why I left it on here is you're absolutely right, Mr. Prisby. We don't have to technically sign this. The Affordable Housing Trust can sign this and be fine with it. Historically, and again, and not to say that this is the right or wrong way, but just historically, I wanted the board to know that at any time in which the Affordable Housing Trust needed to hire an entity to assist with managing, the select board has always taken that and basically, for all intent and purposes, memorialized the agreement. or whatever that may be. So, and tonight I did check. It's not necessary that we sign this tonight. I wanted them to come because I wanted Mr. Crossan to give an update to the board on the developments of this great program. But again, if it's all right with the board, we can vote to sign this, or we can say, Mr. Crossan, if you've already taken a vote in a motion at your meeting, that's going to be more than sufficient as well to carry forward in the contract.
Mr. Chairman, we've unanimously approved the contract through the Affordable Housing Trust.
Mr. Brisby, did you have another thing? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just a comment. You know, the reason I get defensive about this stuff is because there's nothing harder to do than develop affordable housing in a town. People will give you a million reasons why you shouldn't do it, why you shouldn't do it there, why you shouldn't do it now. And dragging another administrative board into this when the entire purpose of the Affordable Housing Trust Enabling Act that was passed by the legislature and adopted by this town in 2007 was to remove affordable housing from those sort of political concerns. So I'm not voting on this tonight as a member of this board. I'll abstain. That's fine. You guys can do what you want, but there's a reason why the trust is supposed to be separate.
Does anyone else on the board have a comment? Mr. Roy?
I apologize. I don't remember if it was Mr. Crossan or Mr. McGoldrick who mentioned the CARES Act. If we don't sign this, will it impact any funding sources that you guys might need for this program?
Not that I'm aware of. We have right now. We have CPA money that we've had historically that we've received. That the Affordable Housing Trust has agreed that we would use a portion of that for this program, and we've received strong confirmation from the CPA that they will backfill any funds that we need. So if that's not an issue, but obviously CPA money is something that is valuable, can be used for a lot of things. We know that the CARES Act funds were received specifically for rental assistance, so it would be wise to use those funds, immediately.
And then Mr. Fazio.
To either Dan or Chris, I'm wondering if if we get money from the CARES Act, that sounds great. Does that compete with other spending from the CARES Act for other needs in town?
Not to my knowledge. I believe the CARES Act, the specific amount that was set aside was specifically for emergency rental assistance. So I don't believe it would compete.
Okay. Can we get confirmation on that? I think that's important.
Absolutely.
I can speak to that, Mr. Chair, if I may. Matt, so when we submitted for the CARES Act money, we had to basically earmark every dollar based on the need that we were applying for at the time. And at the time, we applied for $100,000 for rental assistance, with the understanding that the trust was taking on this project. This was at least a month ago, maybe more at this point. So the money that's come in from the CARES Act is all earmarked down to the penny, and $100,000 of that is specifically and can only be used for rental assistance. And, I would certainly highly recommend that the trust utilize that $100,000 first, because it's, I hate the term found money, but it's money that came to us and it's been earmarked for this purpose. And I would certainly prefer to use that money before we start dipping into CPC money or, the trust money or anything else. So
that makes perfect sense and answers my question thoroughly. Thank you.
Mr. Fazio.
Thank you. Am I off mute?
Yes.
I am. Okay, sorry, my screen just went blank for a minute. So, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Prisby, point taken on this, and I have to agree. I don't feel that board needs to be voting on this issue. If anything, if we do some sort of vote, I would want it to be a motion of supporting the Affordable Housing Trust in this decision, but they don't need it. And then I just have one other question, and this is just out of curiosity, if there were any references contacted in the towns of Stowe and Arlington as far as using MCO as the firm and how well it works communities. I know Arlington pretty well, and I know that they have a pretty vast affordable housing trust, and so I would trust their opinion if there was a reference on them specifically.
I wasn't able to reach out to them, but one of them was fairly new. They had just started the program, but I think it's probably a point well taken. And when we get into more of the due diligence process with MCO, that I can certainly make a phone call to them. I think that's appropriate. I feel pretty confident in what they're doing, but it's a good idea.
Or at least know if you have questions that you have these communities to reach out to. I think both of them would be great references and resources for Grafton.
Certainly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Crossan or Mr. McGoldrick? So, Mr. Crossan, I again, this kind of.
I think we lost him for real this time.
I think Pete's out.
I'm going to wait a minute just to see. It looks like he's logging back on.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Awesome, great, thank you. Sorry about that. So, Mr. Crossan, this kind of came to my attention late yesterday, a question about why this was, on here, but again, it was more of a historical thing that, previous boards have done for Affordable Housing Trust and other entities in Grafton. I personally agree that I don't see a need for us to sign this. You guys have decided on this in your meeting the other week. To Ms. DeFazio's point, unless the board wants to make a motion to sign this contract tonight, I don't see a need or reason, but Ms. DeFazio, if you want to make a motion to affirm in support of this contract, I'll do that as well, or we can just move on. Did I lose everyone again?
No, I'm here. I don't personally think a motion is necessary, so I'm not going to put one forward. So I won't vote on that motion, but I would vote in support if another board member wanted to do a motion to support the Affordable Housing Trust.
Awesome. I hope you don't need to know. You don't need a motion for me to support you guys. So I think we're all set here. I want to thank you very much for waiting tonight. And I know we got a long meeting. I appreciate your patience, and you, Mr. McGoldrick, as well, for making it tonight. Unless you two have any other questions or comments that you want to make the board regarding just what this MCO Housing Services contract does for emergency rental assistance, we can move on.
Good night. Thank you all for your continued support. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For the update.
Thank you.
Good night. All right, so we have two more guests who are here tonight, and I want to get through them in order. I want to get to take item out of order here, which is discussion under Town-Owned Land Committee. Mr. Robbins is here. He would like to give us just basically a quick update as to why he's bringing this to our attention tonight. Mr. Robbins, if you want to have the floor.
Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me. Yeah, so as some of you may know, I've been working with the Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee now for the past 3 years, updating our Open Space and Recreation Plan. And one of the components of that plan is an inventory of open space. And what was put together for us by the consultants that were developing this plan for us this time around turns out to have been not enough to meet what the state really wants to see. So we got, as I think your board submitted, wrote a letter of endorsement for the plan. We submitted that to the state. They've come back and said, we conditionally approve your plan. There's a number of work items that they requested us to do, one of which is to have a more complete inventory of open space. So I've been working on that. And in the process of reviewing a previous open space plan and kind of digging through a lot of records, trying to come up with an up-to-date and complete inventory of all the open space that sits in town in various ways, I've kind of discovered that there are a number of parcels of what looks like they should be open space that really haven't been fully acquired or fully protected by the town in the way that we probably needed them to be protected. So I've done a lot of work in trying to bring this up to date, but the work's not done. And I think there's a number of additional pieces of work that do not necessarily have to be done specifically for the open space inventory to update the plan, but more of a process of catching up with a number of loose ends that have developed since the last town-owned land committee was very active in the late 80s. And they did a lot of good work from what I've been able to find. But now we find ourselves in a position where I've seen a number of subdivisions that had open space designated but never passed to the town, and either given to the town or sold to the town, or had a conservation restriction granted to the town or to the land trust. Rob was here earlier this evening with a conservation restriction that was about 5 years late in being done. I happened to run across that one sort of concurrently with Rob working on it. So I touched base with Rob on that, and he said, "Oh yeah, we saw that and we're working on it." So there's one item that's being taken care of, but in the longer term, I've sort of listed out, and it's in your in your packet. I won't try to go over it in gory detail. I've listed out a number of actions that I think need to be taken, research that needs to be done to determine the protection status of some of the land. As an example, there we have something like 4 parcels that are designated as town forests. The legal status of the protection status of those is somewhat unclear. It depends in part upon how the town went about accepting those parcels by town meeting votes. So there's a number of details and some additional research that needs to be done. So I've identified several fairly short-term tasks that I think a small committee could productively work on, just to bring our inventory and status of town-owned lands and open spaces up to date, and make sure that everything is protected the way we want it to be protected. And aside from that, there are some longer-term tasks, something that we probably need to pay attention to on an ongoing basis in terms of keeping our inventory of town-owned lands up to date, and keeping good records so that the next time we have to update the open space plan, we don't have to reinvent that particular wheel. So I guess what I'm suggesting is that there's sort of 2 parts to this whole idea. One is a committee or even an informal working group, but it could be a formal committee that we put together just to kind of wrap things up, and fill in some missing pieces, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the ongoing work, just looking at included in the packet, the charge of the old town-owned land committee. Some of the work that it did, I think, is probably best considered complete. Some of the work that was in its charge, particularly the thinking about what to do with Chapter 61 land. The Chapter 61 piece, I think we've largely got covered without having to add another committee to that mix. That's one example of something that that is ongoing and is generally handled pretty well by town staff and existing boards and committees that are all required to weigh in on a Chapter 61 withdrawal. So there's a little bit of thought to be given to here as to how we want to approach sort of completing the record that we currently have under development, making sure that we actually have protected in the way we think it should be all of the open space in town. And then there's some more of an ongoing activity, some of which is fairly routine and fairly well handled by existing staff and committees and boards, some of which needs to have some attention periodically paid to it so that we can keep the records up to date and not have to redevelop them every time. So that's my sort of short statement about what I'm thinking here.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Robbins. I appreciate all the work that you've put into this so far, and think that you know, this is something that definitely needs to be done. Is the inventory of open space right now, how is that tracked? Is it GIS or is it on another program? And would that be necessary for if the board decided to form a committee, would they need to know a particular?
To my knowledge, there has not really been any ongoing maintenance of an open space inventory. There was an inventory developed and included in the 2007 Open Space and Recreation Plan. That inventory had nowhere near all of the information that the state looks for in the inventory. It was apparently acceptable to them at the time, but not anymore. And the inventory update that CMRPC did for us as they were helping to draft the plan, they basically took the protected open space data from Mass GIS, and that was the sum total of what they included as an inventory, and that does not meet the requirements of the Open Space and Recreation Plan. So what I've been pulling together right now, I have in a database with GIS. How one of the open questions is how we as a town should, where we should keep that information and how we make it accessible to those who need it and how we maintain it. Like I said, right now I've got it on a computer, my computer in a database with GIS, but that's not going to be in and of itself, that's not good enough. So what we need to do is work out some way to sort of, make sure that that information is preserved and maintained somewhere in the town. I did ask when I started out on this updating effort, I did send an email to everybody in town, who I thought might possibly know of the existence of such an inventory, and I basically got no response. So if it's there, it's hidden away somewhere, or I just asked the wrong person, I don't know. But anyway, I wasn't able to find anything other than what was in the Open Space and Recreation Plan documents. So that is one of my concerns, is to make sure that we capture the information, we have a complete record, and that we have that kept in a place and in a way that we can keep it up to date.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up to that. So do you agree that GIS would be the mechanism, the tool that we would keep all this up to date?
GIS is helpful. It's not actually essential. GIS, the GIS component of that is primarily valuable for giving you a picture, putting the spaces out on a map. But the data itself doesn't have to be maintained in GIS. It possibly could be maintained in something as simple as a spreadsheet. It might not be quite that simple, but it's one of the things it's on my list of things to think about, is what's the best permanent storage mechanism for this?
Thank you.
Questions? All right, so Mr. Robbins, just real quick. So we brought forward the old, the original town-owned land committee. Is there anything within the existing charge that you think that we would need to obviously change? And if so, something for us to consider? Do you want to take as someone that's a point person who's been running this, do you want to take a stab at maybe creating a charge for us to consider at our next meeting?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, excuse me. Not quite sure why my voice is failing me here. Anyway, yes, I'd be happy to take a look at the existing charge. The old charge covers some of what I think the new committee's task would be, but not all of it. As I said before, some of what the old charge said
really just no longer applies. And some of the tasks that I've identified are short-term and long-term, like I said. So I'd be happy to take what I've identified as work that needs to be done. Look at the existing, the old charge. As we know, the committee was disbanded 2 years ago for probably good reasons. It had not done much of anything lately. Anyway, I'd be happy to propose a charge for the committee for consideration at the next meeting.
Okay. Does the committee have any objections to that or any input, Mr. Hoffman?
Yes, Mr. Robbins, I hate to ask you to talk more, but is there a feasible approach to create a working group or a subcommittee of an existing committee that exists rather than, establishing something new?
It's something to perhaps consider. I think what I'd be looking for is participation from the various town boards that the planning board and the conservation commission are the two boards that are most frequently involved in acquiring or recommending open space. Recreation Commission is somewhat involved. So I might be looking for participation from the various town boards. The assessor's office probably needs to be involved.
Got it.
Oh, there is no one town board or committee that really completely covers this. We could consider perhaps even as a subcommittee or something, some ongoing work from the Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee. There may be several options.
Okay, got it. I just want to be thinking, let's be as efficient as we can in terms of utilizing existing board and committee membership and whatnot. Thank you.
Yeah, and there's also, that's what I think that thought was one reason why I'm thinking this committee may, at least for the short-term work I'm envisioning, this committee may not need to be a long-term committee. It may have a, so some of the ongoing work may quite well be integrated into existing boards and committees and staff.
Mr. Chair, if I may, quickly. Yeah, I just want to say if it pleases the board, I would be happy to work directly with Dave and my staff to put together a charge in the board's format that Dave feels like would adequately address some of the issues that he's brought up. We can work directly with Dave to come up with the makeup of the committee. We can take a look at the old charge. If that's the same group that we think we want, we can, put that into the new charge. And then I'd be happy to bring that before the board for ratification at a future meeting.
Board, there you go, Dave. Any objections to that? Speaking, I think that's a great idea. Why don't we do that and we'll coordinate when we can bring it to a future meeting. Mr. Robbins, unless you have anything else, unless anyone has any more questions for Mr. Robbins, thank you very much for bringing this to our attention and the work that you've done thus far. This is fantastic. We appreciate it. All right. I got one more guest here tonight. I know I've got the chief here, Chief Gauthier. Thank you very much for patiently waiting. I'm sure you had a pretty busy afternoon, but I wanted to take one more thing out of order tonight, and that is discussion the fire department transition plan. I kind of left this as more of a general discussion item for the board to consider and talk about. I know a few weeks ago, we voted to take down the advertisement and that we wanted to review both the advertisement for the position of a new full-time fire chief. In addition to that, look at the future job description, and last but not least, have some input as to, a working committee to review potential candidates for consideration of the position. So I wanted to open this up for the board. I know you guys have had some time to look at that advertisement from a few weeks ago in the job description. Didn't know if you had any questions or anything that the board wanted to bring up as a discussion item tonight about what it wishes to do. Mr. Fazio.
I think Colleen had her hand up first. I'm going to let her.
Oh, Troy, please.
Thanks, Doreen. I guess my first question would be, are we all in agreement as to what direction we're heading towards? Are we heading towards a strong chief or not? And what steps do we have to take to make sure we can change our charter if need be, or adopting any mass general laws that we might need to adopt, and finding out the right process to do that?
Has the board gave any more consideration to that? Want to answer
Haven't had a
that?
conversation about it. The only thing that I've ever heard about this was, through some rumors, some conjecture, some innuendo. We came very close to losing the hierarchy within the fire department just a couple weeks ago, which somehow people forget. And I've heard talk that we might be looking for a weak chief. I've heard that, obviously the committee had recommended a strong chief. I've heard there's a hybrid approach that nobody's actually had a conversation about with me in a room. So if there are people that have opinions about this, and I'm sure the chief does, I'd like to hear about them right now.
Chief, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, could you hear me? Okay. I think going with the strong chief, it makes for a good candidate coming in. If you look, Colleen did a survey of 12 area communities and 9 being with strong chief. Strong chief gives the fire chief kind of control of the fire department. He can hire his people. He can promote his people. He can do many things. And I think that's very important to start doing this if we're going to go with the full-time chief. So we really need to look in this way. That's my opinion. I think it was the survey's opinion and the staffing committee's opinion on this. If you look at the area towns that have the strong chief, I mean, I think it's the thing to do. That's just my opinion. I think you'd get a good candidate to come in and take over as the fire chief of the town of Grafton.
Anyone else have any questions? Mr. Fazio.
Yeah, I just have a comment. So my recollection is that this board was also in favor of a strong chief, and so was the consulting firm we hired, and so was the search committee, as Chief Gauthier brought up. And so I think the details of the transition were such that we wanted to be able to hire someone to work under Chief Gauthier. So he remained the chief until he stepped down as chief. And so the real discussion became, this person will not be a strong chief until Chief Gauthier retires. And the logistics of how we do that, we want to make sure that we hire a candidate that has the qualifications of a strong chief. And it's important to have the input of Chief Gauthier. But how do we put that out in an advertisement or a job description to make sure we have those qualifications with the understanding that we already have a fire chief? I don't have an answer to that yet, but that was my recollection from our last discussion.
Mr. Fazio, I would agree that, what comes first, chicken or the egg in this situation, because the strong chief provision doesn't exist today in Grafton, but then how do you go advertise for something and put a description in for something that technically right now doesn't exist, although it is in alignment with the other consulting groups? It's a great question. Real quick, Mr. Frisbee, Mr. Often has had his hand up a couple of times.
Just
and then you.
To follow up on that point, were you to hire somebody that worked under the chief until Mickey retires, that person wouldn't be the strong chief yet. They could be, but would that person have to then reapply for the job once we passed the law or passed the bylaw that would enable us to have the strong chief? And if so, what kind of guarantees, if any at all, could you give to the person to entice them to come in, because I think this is one of the problems, right? Is we're looking to entice somebody good. And in order to entice somebody good, you're more likely to get somebody good if you're going to entice them with the strong chief role. But we don't have that in place yet. So that sort of leaves us with a sticky point that I need to hear the details worked out on that.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I just first want to say that I'm in strong support of making sure that Mickey continues to be our chief. You can have to, and so we've got to work through this transition in a very deliberate way. My understanding is that this is going to require a change to our charter. There's significant time that it takes to do that. And really that is up to the voters, that it isn't up to this board. So I would suggest that maybe one way that we could express some indication to potential candidates, because I do think that's the key, is that this board adopt a resolution to support the strong chief and moving forward with putting that on the ballot to change our charter might be one way to do it. Because I do believe that the strong chief is the way to go. I'll also say though, relative to that, I have some concerns with making somebody a strong chief without having any kind of relationship with them. So we did a survey of the surrounding communities. I don't know how those communities got to a strong chief. I would have felt more comfortable with making Mickey a strong chief had he, not had a full-time job and, all the other things. But because we have a relationship, he's got that reputation. We have that history with Mickey. The idea that we're going to bring in a strong chief from outside that we don't know, and that we're going to give up control to let somebody go, not for cause, for example, that we're going to just give them their own budget to manage fully with somebody that we've got a relationship. I'm 100% on board with that, but I'm concerned about the approach that we take to this in terms of when we do that. So I'm a little bit conflicted in terms of, is it the right thing to go guns blazing right now for the town with a strong chief, knowing that we've, that effectively, if we bring somebody in and it doesn't work out, we've got to go for cause to so it's a concern of mine.
1 second, Mr. Fazio. Chief, did you want to respond? I know we're trying to go in order here. Did you want to respond to Mr. Prisby's?
I'm sorry, on the strong chief, I think if you start moving forward now, my time frame is December 31st of 2021. That's when I have to retire. So, if it takes going to town meeting and then going to elections in May, I'm willing to stay at this point. And as long as we're moving forward with all this, and then that after May, and then we have the job description ready to go, we can start advertising, say, in June. And if we have somebody by August or whatever to work with me or whatever to make the transition, it gives us 3 or 4 months to make the transition with the call department, get them acclimated in town, get them acclimated with the whole force, and get a smooth transition. And then he takes over when I retire. I'm willing to do that at this point, as long as we're going to move forward in that route. We have 17 months.
Mr. Fazio.
Thank you. I was thinking something very similar to what Chief Gothier was saying. So when would we bring the charter change to town meeting? May, I'm assuming. October of May 2021. Is that correct?
We would probably bring it in October, Mr. Fazio, but there's 2 components here. There's a charter change that has to occur, but the town meeting has to adopt the Mass General Law section. Oh, Chief, help me out here. Section 44. Anyway, there's a Mass General Law provision. I don't memorize off the top of my head right now. I apologize. That town meeting also has to adopt as the strong chief provision. The part in the charter that would need changing is who appoints the fire chief. And furthermore, that if you're moving to a strong chief and you're moving away from fire engineers, the charter would need to have some amendments made to that provision under the appointment that is listed under the town administrator. So I think there's two pieces here. You don't make the charter change to adopt the strong chief provision. That's just a town meeting with a simple majority vote on adopting that provision. Then changing the charter, obviously, my recommendation would be doing in October town meeting to bring it forward to a May ballot for the town to consider and then ratify it with the voters upon successful adoption at town meeting in October to be brought to May at the ballot. That would be just for the charter only. And that would be making changes to the appointment and about looking to abolish the fire engineers.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So it looks like if the adoption was made in May, we could move forward with a search committee. And I think that's what I was getting at before it was adopted on a charter. So I think a really important part of this that we spoke about last time too is what the search committee looks like. And Mr. Often had brought up a while ago about, you know, perhaps using some of these strong chiefs that work in mutual aid and other departments and maybe calling them in to be part of the search committee. We'd want Chief Gothier on this committee. And, you know, I would have a lot more confidence with the right people on this committee choosing someone who they feel would be, you know, the next person to take over as a strong chief. So maybe have those qualifications, even if we don't have that in place yet. I think that's probably our only option.
Anyone else have a question or comment? Ms. Roy.
I just wanted to clarify what you had just said. So it sounds like we would need to go to town meeting first to adopt the Mass General Law before we could try to change the charter. Is that correct? And then to change the charter, we would have to do that at a ballot. Is that correct?
Town meeting and ballot for the charter.
Town meeting charter. Is there anything saying that we can't put this on the ballot in November?
Can't run a local election during a national election. I looked into that already.
Okay, so you can't have a local just ballot question. All right. And then is anything that says that we can't have a special election just at a different time rather than waiting all the way till May? If it gets adopted at October town meeting, we know that this is very time sensitive. We're going to want as much time as possible to make sense to just have a special ballot election to adopt it so we can change our charter sooner than waiting until May. For me, I want to give ourselves as much time as possible so that if we run into hiccups, that we have enough time to do that.
Chief?
So here's a thought that I have. We're going to be coming into budget season, and obviously I'm still going to be around, so I'm going to be working on the following year's budget. And if we work on getting a new chief coming in, saying after July 1st of next year, we can work together on a new budget for 2022, so that when the chief takes over, he's been involved in that budget season. And he's not inheriting a budget that somebody else did for him, that he was able to work on that budget as well to move forward. Just a thought.
My understanding is that right about that time frame, the budget is pretty much set. Becca, correct me if I'm wrong, but usually you have the budget done, or you have a proposed budget, I should say, not done. Early March, February timeframe? February, right. So in actuality, for someone to work, I think into that capacity, Chief, they would have to be on board sooner rather than later to be in effect having an outcome for July 1st consideration for the budget. Otherwise, if they come
looking at not the next fiscal budget, but I mean, if we had to wait till May for the ballot, right after that, we have to start working on our budget, because normally we've had to submit it in October of that year, and then we meet on the following budget. That's what we've had to do in the past. So I'm thinking that if we have him on by fall, working with myself and my secretary or whatever, he can help work on that budget so that when my last day, he's taken over, but it's going to be his budget for the following year.
Yes, Ms. Roy.
Is that pretty typical in a fire department where you're transitioning to a new chief, that you put an ad out that you're trying to hire a chief, you bring a chief in and say that you're going to just work here under this other position we don't have a title for yet, and then you take over and chief on this date when our current chief retires? Or would that put off some candidates that say, no, I'm a chief now, I want to stay a chief?
I have, I don't know who you're asking, but that is my fear. You know, that, you know, you're looking for a very specific person here. You're looking for, you know, the right candidate, especially if you're looking to go with a strong chief. I just think it's not to say that that person's not out there and they won't find us and we won't find them. I just think that this process is going to have to, we're going to have to be measured in our approach. I do think that we need to be particularly cautious or with the people we put on the search committee, because I think that that's going to really determine who comes forward, who comes out of this process. And it's going to be tricky because, you know, you're going to be advertising for a chief, but they're not going to be a chief. Right? There's gonna be some transition period with Mickey. So I just think that, you know, we need to think about that carefully. And I wanna just, Colleen, your questions earlier about the ballot, the board has the power to call a special town meeting anytime, 14 days notice for any reason that you see fit. So we can put together a warrant if the board wanted to take up the strong chief provision in, you know, 20 days. We could make it happen. And the board can also call for a ballot at any time. So that requires a little bit more notice because there's a printing of a ballot, obviously, which takes a little bit more time for an election. But, you know, that the board has the power to do both of those. You don't necessarily have to wait until October or May. You know, if the board felt like there was a sense of urgency to have it happen sooner than that, the board has the power to do that. So I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, in terms of that sense of urgency, is there any continuing risk with our inspector? Because ultimately, you know, this is a position, the fire chief position, but there are other positions that are recommended and budgeted in the fire study committee's recommendations. So I'm wondering about the other things. Are those things at risk? Is this something that, you know, I'm feeling some urgency to start advertising and to get moving on this so that as we think about those other positions, right, it's 3 or 4 positions, depending on how you look at it, between the inspector and the, you know, safety and recruitment and retention and all these different positions. I think we want to have the, you know, who's going to be our next chief have some input into that decision making. And, you know, we had put a half a year's budget into this year to kind of get moving on that. So I think it's important for us to think about all of those different things. So in terms of urgency, I'd like to just, you know, talk as a board about whether we think we can move this whole process forward a little bit. Is that a feasible approach to take? And just one last thing, there's been a lot of commentary about the search committee. Becca, I couldn't agree more, and Doreen as well. I think we really have to get the right people on the search committee. That would give me confidence that we would be able to hire somebody that actually I would have some trust in because of the hiring process to actually bring in as a new chief, as a strong chief, rather than bringing somebody in as a weak chief, developing a relationship, you know, seeing that transition process be successful and then promoting them into a strong chief. So I'd like to explore a more urgent sort of process for this.
I've got a question I want to propose to the board. So we're talking about this plan to move to a strong chief, like the report called for, and timings of the essence. What are the objections to hiring the characteristics of the person that would work with a strong chief designation? And then as that person comes on board, I think it's very telling of an applicant if they see that, okay, this is where the town is today and this is where they're moving. That, you know, that can draw in certain characteristics of a candidate that I think could be, you know, extremely beneficial to the town in terms of, you know, being patient. I get some people want to have, you know, the position and the title and the authority right away, but we're going from a part-time model to a full-time model. There's a lot that has to occur for someone new to come in. But in fairness to, you know, what I believe could be some additional costs unforeseen and having, you know, to Becca's point, you know, a special town meeting, which we can do. We can hold a special election, which we can do. That maybe we look at the feasibility of hiring the characteristics of the next permanent chief to be someone who would fit into a strong chief. And then we're working on this in parallel. If I fear if we wait, you know, a longer or another year, you know, we keep pushing this down the road a little bit. And I know what Chief Gauthier had said that, you know, this is fine as long as we're making progress, but I don't want to wait. And I personally think that if the way that the appointment process is structured today, then we just live within that, and then we eventually change that appointment structure and when we move to the strong chief provisions. I don't know how the board feels about that. Mr. Fazio.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, I hear you and Mr. Often's comments, and I agree. There has been a sense of urgency for this for a long time, but I also don't want to do this incorrectly twice. And we have to get it right the second time. And I don't feel confident enough that if we had someone with the characteristics of being a strong chief, that person, we can't guarantee a person with characteristics a job. And so what I'd like to do is based on something, a great point that Ms. Roy said earlier, is are there other communities who have been through something similar to this? And what I'd like to do is, you know, maybe Gauthier knows the answer to this question, but you know, talk to our mutual aid communities who were part of this, you know, study, because I know that they came in at one time. These chiefs came in and gave a little bit of input on our study, but just find out in more detail. What did you do? How did you go from on-call chief to a full-time chief? Was it the same person? What was your process? And then we come back to Chief Gauthier and say, is this a good plan for Grafton? What do we have to change? But to try to reinvent the wheel, if a community has done it successfully, I think we use their model. And I don't want to move ahead until we're all on the same page. And that includes staff, meaning our administrative staff as well, administration staff as well.
Right.
I hear what you're saying, Peter, and I like the concept of finding a candidate with the right characteristics that we could someday promote. I just would be worried to make promises to any candidate that we can't really guarantee. It's going to come down to voters, right? And I think if October is coming up, right, we have to set the warrant, I think it's by September 4th. So if the board chooses to take that first step, whether it's adopt that Mass General Law, and then take steps later to change it on the ballot, that is an indication to a candidate that we are taking the right steps. And while we can't guarantee you a ballot vote will pass, it did pass here in town meeting, and we are taking the appropriate steps. And I think that would bring in those characteristics that you're looking for without necessarily promising them anything, but showing them in good faith, this is what we hope to accomplish.
The only thing I want to bring up also is, because Matt often said about getting these two other positions. We just had our first interview today for a fire inspector. We have another one tomorrow, and we have two more that we're going to try to schedule. So we have 4 interviews total that we're doing for the fire inspector's position right now, which if we can get that filled, that's a big step forward for everybody, because that takes a big burden off of Steve, that's been doing it part-time, and Jim Barker, they've both been doing it part-time. They're both retired, and it would take a big burden off of my shoulders at this point. But I agree with Colleen and Doreen. I think we need to do this right and get it right this time and move forward with the strong chief, with the vote at town meeting and then the ballot vote, and be ready to go. And if and when that passes, so that we can get a good candidate to come in and take over the Grafton Fire Department.
Often.
Yes, I'm just wondering if we could adopt, go to town meeting in October, adopt that language. Then we would have the language in place. That would be a very kind of strong indicator to a potential candidate that we are on that path. And, obviously we may choose to wait or not. But at that point, we would consider advertising, and that would give us a little bit of room between now and then to have some of these discussions with mutual aid districts around us.
All right, so what I'm hearing next steps is that we want to begin drafting language for warrant to adopt the strong chief provision Mass General Law for the vote for town meeting vote. Is that correct? And everything else will subsequently follow after that. So is it our intention at the October town meeting that we will put an article on the warrant for making the amendments to the town charter that would reflect a passage of the strong chief provision?
You have to do both at the same time. Is that what you're saying? I thought one had to go to the ballot.
Yeah, so let me back up. So let's talk about just charter amendments, period, right? So charter amendments, in order for them to work and to get to the ballot, the town meeting has to approve a proposed amendment at town meeting floor. Once the proposed amendment is approved, it then goes to the ballot box for local general election for final adoption. It's like a 2-step process, Colin.
And that's just for the charter piece. That's not for
That's
adopt.
There's 2 parts, right? So just remember, there's the adoption of the strong chief provision, which is just a town meeting vote to adopt it, right? And then it doesn't go any further. Once it's adopted, that's adopted. And then there's the charter amendment, which goes through the process I just outlined.
I see. Okay.
I have a big book on it downstairs in my basement on a bookshelf that goes through that whole amendment process if anyone's really wanted to read up on it. right.
Mr. Chair, can I also just request that in our next possible opportunity, we put on the agenda a discussion about the hiring committee? And I think that's an important thing for us to discuss.
Is this a hiring committee or search committee?
The hiring committee.
Hiring committee, okay. Okay. Okay, anything else? Mr. Fazio, yes.
Yep, we just, if there's no more comments or questions from the board, we have some Q&As that came in, so I just don't want to forget those.
Anything on the Q&A that has to do with the agenda item?
Let's see. Okay, so there's one that came in from Joanne Duncan because it didn't come in earlier. I wanted to clarify that I'm not getting a raise. I submitted a comment earlier during the discussion on the BOH appointments, but for some reason it was not visible to the board. So I just want to read that into the record. And then Karen Francis again, she said, with all due respect given to Chief Gothier, why will the chief be in charge rather than be an equal to the new strong chief? I would like to give Chief Gothier an opportunity to answer that. I think because you can't have two fire chiefs at the same time, but I will let him. That's really the answer, right?
That's correct. Can only have one fire chief.
And then Dan Kutcher wrote in, how much does it cost to hold a special election? The FY21 budget appropriates 6 months of the full-time chief salary, but it sounds like we wouldn't be ready to hire by January. There would be some money available for that line item. Yeah, Dan, I think you're right. That's I think still a little premature in the discussion, but point made. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Nope, I know they both cost money. That's all I know. How much exactly during COVID? Who knows?
Right.
Yeah, I'd have to ask Candy. For some reason, the number 10,000 is in my head, but I think that may be from when a previous member resigned and we had to hold a special election to have another board member come on. For some reason, 10,000 is in my head, but I can definitely talk to Candy and get a number from her.
Okay, and then there's a bunch of other comments not related to the agenda. I don't know if Becca, you want to answer those, or should I just leave it until the end for the board to answer?
Is there anything to do with the fire department transition? I don't want to hold up the chief anymore.
Nothing. So I'll leave it.
All right, Chief, try to save you some time. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. Unless the board has any other questions, or Chief, you have any other comments, I think we're ready to move on. We have our next steps.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Okay. All right, let's go back to, I need to do this to you, Colleen. We need to go back to section 3 here on resignations for Andrew Shellberg.
I move the board vote to accept the resignation of Andrew Shellberg from the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Trust and send him a letter of thanks.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Motion made second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor? A roll call vote. Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Frisbee?
Yeah.
Fazio?
DeFazio, aye.
Often aye.
Carlson, aye. Declare the motion carried. Thank you very much, Andrew, for your service. Appreciate it. Next up, we have an appointment to election worker Carl Parisi.
I move the board vote to appoint Carl Parisi as an election worker.
Second.
Motion made second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those by roll call vote. Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Mr. Frisbee? Mr. Fazio?
DeFazio, aye.
Mr. Often?
Often aye.
Peter Carlson, aye. Very motion carried. Thank you. Okay, next up, on new business, we're going to section 8 here. Vote to appoint temporary town administrator. So I put this on the agenda tonight. I wanted the board to move from an acting position to a temporary position of town administrator for Ms. Meekins tonight. I wanted to at least bring this to your attention. The reason for the appointment is necessary for a temporary town administrator, obviously, is to fill in a temporary position until we go through the formal search process. So I've given all of you, I know we'll have a discussion later on timeline for that, but I wanted to open this up to the board tonight for this new business or hear any discussion. Mr. Frisbee.
Yeah, I think I need a discussion on timeline with this conversation. So I want to know, and I think I know the answer to this because I have it up on my screen here. What does the charter say? Because I think everybody else is going to want to know too about this. What's the difference between acting and temporary? And what are our options for temporary? And I'm sorry, I'll listen, but I just have to turn my screen off here.
Okay, so an acting town administrator is someone who retains the position when the appointing authority is not available. So in this case, seeing how there is no appointing authority, it does fall on Becca to be an acting town administrator. But seeing how there wasn't any such official action necessarily taken, our option is because due to an absence per the town charter, we either have to appoint a temporary town administrator to fulfill those duties and roles as soon as possible. Well, I mean, almost immediately, and then move to a search process, which is anywhere from 3 to 6 months that's outlined in the town charter. So if all things being fair and equal, and if we look and work backwards, we're looking at 6 months from Friday to be in an appointment for a permanent, for the permanent position of town administrator. And that's what the charter essentially states. And I summarized a lot of things. Mr. Brisby.
Follow up, why wouldn't we just hire an intern?
I'm sorry. So the charter doesn't call for an interim. It calls for the temporary town administrator. The interim and the temporary are essentially the same in this situation. They both retain all of the roles of the town administrator outlined in the charter and the bylaws, and it's just what our charter calls it. They don't call it an interim. It's called a temporary. Ms. Roy?
Are we allowed to have an acting town administrator, as you described above, someone who just kind of fills in when the appointing authority is not available for 3 to 6 months?
No, I don't see it that way. This was outlined to me that we should have a designation of a temporary town administrator.
How long can an acting town administrator be in that role before a designated person needs to be appointed?
So again, the acting town administrator is a designation and a title given to them by the appointing authority, which would be the permanent town administrator. Because the absence of there is a permanent town administrator, there's no real person to really grant that appointment. And then the timeline for how long a temporary town or a temporary town administrator can administer the town in the absence of a town administrator. I mean, theoretically, you could have someone out on medical for 8 months, and the acting town administrator can be the acting town administrator for those 8 months, as long as the appointing authority has terms and conditions and contract with the town as the permanent town administrator.
So having Ms. Meakin stay on as acting town administrator is not possible, is what you're saying, because she couldn't be in that role for 3 to 6 months.
That is my interpretation of our charter, correct?
But we could advertise for and hire a temporary town administrator while the search, for right now, have this conversation in another week once we have applicants, or 2 weeks, and then form the search committee.
Repeat that one more time.
Yeah, we could advertise for the role of temporary town administrator, have applicants for it, gauge what we want to do within the next 2 weeks, and then form the search committee under the charter for the full-time position.
Yep, that is something that the board can do. Exactly. Any questions? Mr. Fazio?
I'm unmuted, right? Yeah.
Yep. you're good.
So question for the board members, why wouldn't we choose the assistant town administrator who's been responsible for all the work thus far in this office, and go with someone who's a consultant and probably pay higher consulting fees? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I have concerns. We're talking about 2 jobs here. Becca has her own set of responsibilities, and I think I'm comfortable with her taking over for a week while Tim's on vacation, but I'm not sure that it makes sense to try to have one person do the job of two people for 3 to 6 months. That's my thinking on it.
Fazio.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, so, or Becca, so what would be the scenario if that was the case? To Matt's point, if we were, technically losing an assistant town administrator, would we be lopping all those responsibilities into one temporary position for a while, or would we be out in ATA position? What would that look like?
Do you want me to answer that, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Okay. If the board, chose to appoint me tonight, I would take on the duties of both offices in the interim. Just a couple of points of clarification. The charter doesn't allow for more than a 6-month appointment for the temporary position, right? So, it would be a transition like anything else. A lot of towns have assistant town administrators for this very purpose, somebody who's prepared to step in an extenuating circumstance. I'm not trying to make a case for myself. I'm just trying to give you guys information. The other important point that I want to make is that an acting town administrator does not have appointing authority, except in emergency situations. So that's why you can't hobble along for 3 or 6 months with an acting town administrator, because you're unable to appoint anybody in their absence to do anything and or appoint any new positions that come up that may be vacant at the time, unless it's an emergency. So that's, I think, why the charter contemplates the timeline that it does with respect to having the temporary versus the acting. So I just want to make sure you have that information. And yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you for that, Becca. So as a follow-up, so I have confidence that you could do the roles and responsibilities of this office. If anyone's asked you to be willing to take over the roles and responsibilities of this office on a temporary basis. And, do you have confidence that you could manage the office, all the responsibilities that were to come, as well as the ones you were currently doing?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering if is the appointing authority that's the main thing that we need to sort of restore? And if so, does it have to be, like, could it be somebody like the police chief, for example? He's very well respected in town. If, Becca will continue keeping the day as if Tim were on vacation and we have somebody to do our appointments, to give us a little bit more time to sort of consider the timing and process here. I'm not advocating one way or another. I'm just trying to think through all the different options.
Right. So the way that I'm reading this, Matt, is that the board has to appoint someone as a temporary town administrator to have, to Ms. Meekins' point, the appointing authority to have what's called the delegation of authority. So if you read section 4-3 of the town charter, it says the town administrator may authorize any subordinate officer or employee to exercise any power to perform any function or duty which is assigned to the office of the town administrator, provided, however, that all acts performed under such delegation shall at all times be deemed to be the acts of the town administrator. So right now, because we don't have that appointing authority, okay, we have to essentially appoint someone as the temporary town administrator, okay? Once that happens, then to your point, if they have to appoint the chief to be an acting TA for like a week or so, then that is something that temporary position, a designation, can do. Ms. Roy, sorry.
When do we have to make a decision by? Because it does sound like it's time sensitive. Is this something that we have to make a decision tonight on? Do we have a week, 2 weeks? What is the time frame for this decision?
The timeframe is preferably, I think this is pretty important. It needs to be something done sooner rather than later. It is my, as the chair, I need to bring this to your all's attention that, yeah, this is something that I brought it up tonight. That's why I have even on your vote to appoint on here just so we cover ourselves. But yeah, we need to have something in here sooner rather than later.
So it's just difficult to make a decision when I don't have all the information. I don't know what it would cost to bring an outside interim in. I don't know what it would cost to have Becca step up and become the interim TA. And I think that if they're glaringly different costs, that could impact how I would want to vote on that.
Right, Mr. DeFazio. Yep.
Sorry, I don't know how to work this computer. I mean, with all due respect, these should have been discussions before we went into an agreement with the former town administrator. I think that not having any plan in place, like I brought up earlier, is irresponsible, and we need to make a decision one way or another. I'm in favor of having Becca as the temporary administrator. I think it would be foolish not to. I think it would be foolish not to make a decision tonight. We don't know if Becca's going to stay. Maybe she'll resign, and then we're left with no one running this office. So I think it's urgent that we come up with a plan.
I just want to respond to that. You were part of the conversations. You know exactly why we weren't allowed to have a plan in place. It wasn't for lack of trying. There were many board members that wanted to have those conversations, but we were told under advice of legal counsel that we were not able to have these conversations until such time as the agreement was in place. So we had our hands tied a lot of different ways, and I think it's pretty irresponsible to make it sound like this was something that we just were winging, because it's not what was happening at all.
But to respond to that, Colleen, we need to be urgent and make this decision immediately. Point taken.
My feelings, Mr. Frisbee, please.
Yeah, I agree with Colleen here. I don't like being told that this is my option. And I in part agree with Doreen. I really wish we were able to have a transition plan that was a little bit better than the one I'm looking at right now. God damn, I can't even say, I was about to say, I can't even say it. Here's my thing. I'm going to make a motion that we advertise for a temporary town administrator. Give me some options here, and let's come back next week.
Mr. Fazio.
I would just like, before we make a motion, I would like to read the comments from the public.
Can we get through our stuff first, Mr. Fazio, just real quick?
I think that we should hear from the public before we vote. Yes, we should.
Wait a minute. I haven't had a chance to.
There's a motion on the floor.
Excuse me. There's a motion, but it hasn't been seconded yet. Hold on one second. Okay. One of us runs the meeting, please. I do have a motion that was made, but no one has made a second, but I have yet to put any additional input into this. I've been running you guys real quick here, just pointing out who needs to go next. So give me a minute. So at this point in time, I want to consider this, that although the board can choose to go out and advertise for this position, there will be an associated cost with that. There will be an associated cost of bringing in an additional net new person in here to fulfill that role. Right now, we have funding for our assistant town administrator today. So part of what I'm saying is that in lieu of asking the town to allocate more funds for this position, that from a temporary standpoint, that we should strongly consider what we have in our store today. People don't come into an assistant town administrator position without the presumption that they may become a town administrator at some point in time. This is what's happened today. And yes, due to the constraints in which we had to work within the legalese realm and so on and so forth that occurred over the past few weeks, I too feel very stressed that we couldn't have a transition plan in place, because we can't have those discussions in executive session. They have to be done here in open session. With that said, Ms. Meekins has all my confidence in the world. I have all the confidence in the world in Ms. Meekins. I believe that, I think given her experience and just where things are in town for a temporary time frame, that she would be the logical choice. It may not be the most popular choice among some of the board members here, and I understand that you want to have additional options. Time is of the essence. I understand that. You want to bring in other people, you want to advertise to bring additional people in here, we're going to have to pay for that position. We're going to have to figure out a place to cut the budget to make that work. So what do we cut? I believe, in appointing, this is my feeling, appointing Ms. Meekins as temporary town administrator, not only will she be able to hit the ground running, but she's going to know where all the things are today. Not that she wouldn't help out whoever it is that would have to come in after the fact. I'm not saying that, that's the case, but I do feel that she's in the best position to transition our town for the next few months. And that's all I have to say. Mr. Prisby, did you say you had a motion?
I did. I had a motion. I read it.
Can you read
the motion? Yes.
Move that the
Prisby,
board
you had a
advertise
motion.
for the position of temporary town administrator.
I'm sorry, it broke up. I couldn't hear what you said.
Very frustrating meeting gets more frustrating. Move that the board advertise for the position of temporary town administrator.
Second, but now that we're in discussion, can I go back to what Peter had said? Is he saying there's no associated cost with Ms. Meekins taking on this position? She would just take this position and there would be no additional cost? He left.
Yeah, lost Peter.
We lost Peter. I can answer that question. We would have to go into executive session if we decided to have negotiations, if the board decided to have Becca as our temporary town administrator.
So to Mr. Often's point, having two people available to do the work sounds a lot smarter to me. And if I'm just going to invent numbers, let's say it's going to be $10,000 to pay an interim town administrator. Now we have two people sharing that load, or giving that $10,000 just to Becca. I just think it's premature tonight to make a decision without all of the information. And while I don't know if I agree to start advertising right now for an interim, I definitely want all of the information. What would an interim cost? What am I balancing this against? There's a cost associated with both decisions. So it's not like we're, and I just want to know what are we voting for?
Mr. Fazio.
So, this isn't the best decision, but it might be a solution nonetheless. Can we keep Becca as an acting town administrator for another week until the next meeting? And so the board has time to do their research and make a solid decision and vote on it next week. And I know some of us are not ready to do that, but it sounds like some of the board is. So I would be more open to that than hiring a consultant. But I also know what consultants in municipalities cost, and it's not $10,000.
I apologize for my absence. So we have a motion made and second. We're still in discussion. Mr. Often.
Yeah, I would support that approach. I don't feel like I have all the information that I need to make a decision tonight. I do have some significant concerns with trying to, for 3 to 6 months, put somebody in a position where they're trying to do two jobs. And I also don't feel like I know how quickly we could get somebody in as a temporary administrator. So I'm interested in the timing and the cost of that. So I'm happy to do my research over the next week and bring this up as a point of discussion.
Because we're discussing wholesale change, I'll bring it up. If you can have an assistant town administrator do the job of a town administrator, that you probably don't need both roles. So as long as we're talking about where money's coming from, let's have a serious talk about it.
Fazio.
I'll answer that if you don't mind, through you, Mr. Chair. We have a goals meeting next week, as I mentioned earlier, and I think we have, between the fire chief and this office, I think we have potential to talk about a lot of interesting stuff. So again, I'm in favor of having an assistant town administrator, but we could definitely table this discussion and talk about things like that in more detail.
Should we discuss pushing off the goals meeting for a week so that we can handle this next week? I do think it's time sensitive, and I do think a goals meeting, while it is very important, I do think having a plan for our town administrator trumps goals at this moment. I would like to make sure if we are meeting next week that this is being handled.
That's up to the board. So that's Ms. Roy's suggestion. Mr. Fazio, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah. So, Ms. Roy, Peter and I spoke about, it would still be, we still have a few business items to talk about next week. So it would also be a meeting for us. And so, I would be open to either one. I think we could transition very well from these important discussions into a goals meeting on the same meeting, but it would also be pushing out a week if that's what the board wanted to do. But I absolutely agree with you that this takes precedence.
So it was my understanding the goals meeting, we were going to attempt to meet in person. And I just feel like for public participation, we have 30 people on right now. We've had up to over 50 at this point today. I just think having a regularly scheduled, what people are used to, meeting to discuss this and put it to bed possibly next week makes more sense. And then segue into goals another time. They just, while I agree it could be done at the same time, I think we should separate them.
I'm in favor of that. If the rest of the board is, I don't know.
I'm in favor of that.
Okay, why don't we do that? And so next week, we'll put this on the agenda.
Motion on the table. I just wanted to, that's been seconded. I don't know if we need to take a vote on that.
Oh, no, we will. I'm just writing the notes down so I don't forget. That's all. Okay, so I have a motion made and seconded. If there isn't any further discussion.
I'll withdraw my motion, Peter.
Who seconded it?
I'll second. I seconded, so I'll withdraw my second.
Okay, so we don't have to take a vote. Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman, should I go through public comments now? I haven't looked at them, but we seem to have a lot.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, just a reminder to the public too, that if we talk about anything, I'm not going to ask I'm not going to have the question read twice. And then secondly, this is no comments. So there's some comments on here. Mr. Chairman, should I read those into the record or should we just be working on questions?
Let's work with the questions. I mean, people who are coming in and using the Q&A to kind of, this wouldn't be allowed if we were in a regular session. They wouldn't be able to allow the blurt out. I would call them out of order. So if you would just go through the questions first, or things that people have questions on, that would be great.
Okay. So Karen Francie said, where is the town finding the money for the severance as well as the temporary TA? Does anyone want to answer that?
What was that question again? I'm sorry.
Where is the town finding the money for the severance as well as a temporary TA?
There's two questions to that. I'll have to get back to them exactly where those monies would come from. I don't have the accounts off the top of my head, but I would assume one of them would be the salary line item for the town administrator that was approved at the town meeting we had in June. And then as for the second part of the question, I don't have an answer to that one.
Okay, and then moving on, Karen Francis again, Ms. Meekins also has relationships with vendors and contractors that the fired TA had, and that's a question. So Becca, I'm going to answer yes, that you do have relationships with all the vendors and contractors. If that's incorrect, you can let me know. And okay, and then so comment, sort of question from Justin Wood, 5 Garden Street. Despite my own concern to some of Ms. Meekins' past judgments, I would be remiss if I didn't state I felt that not giving her the role of temporary TA would hurt our community of service and responsibilities of the town offices. I would be supportive of a vote to give this formal role of temporary TA. Terry Turgeon, shouldn't you have considered this when you decided to part ways with the TVA? Yes, Terry, we had this discussion. We could not. Ms. Roy clarified that. Greg Marr, there's also a specific section on how to appoint a new town administrator involving a search committee. Yes, Mr. Marr, we are aware of that. We're just trying to, at this moment, have a temporary town administrator until we also, we will go through exactly how it's done according to the charter on involving a search committee when we are appointing a new town administrator. This is a temporary position. Greg Marr also, I'm gonna post this as a question. I don't believe the charter allows for hiring a temporary town administrator prior to hiring the permanent town administrator. Does anyone have an answer to that? I don't believe that's true, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't think that's true, based on my reading of the charter. Yeah.
Okay. Terry Turgeon, I really appreciate your comments here, but you know, these are not questions that are really related to the conversation. These are emotions about Becca. So, you know, I'm not going to read these. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. All right, Cindy Ide, administrative assistant to the town administrator, in quotes, whoever that may be. When will the select board give direction to staff, particularly me? I've been in the dark in this entire process. I was blindsided. I feel that I have been without direction since Friday. Who do I report to? Has anyone told me this? No, no one has given me the courtesy or reached out to me. I have been here for 16 years and never seen such chaos. No one has reached out to us with direction. Having a serious talk now is way too late. No one has even said to Becca is acting. Please give the staff that much information. With Ed's motion, if it passes, does this mean I am reporting to a direct supervisor? My question, who am I reporting to? I think Miss Ide deserves an answer from one of us.
I think she does too. I will call her tomorrow morning and speak with her about that directly.
Charles, Mr. Chair.
What's that? Yes, Mr. Frisbee.
If I can, for a second here. We're being way too truncated here with what we're talking about. And I understand that there are some things that we can't talk about. But, you know, to the extent that people feel frustrated, I can just tell them I share their frustration. The public hiring process and transition planning is not like anything that you've experienced for those of you who work in the private sector. In the private sector, if there was going to be a change, you would have discussed candidates way ahead of time, and you know you would have salary ranges way ahead of time. But because we did this in the way we did it, and for the reasons we did it that way, as I talked about earlier, you couldn't have all these discussions ahead of time. And because of open meeting law, and I guess thank goodness for it, you get to see how the sausage is made. You're seeing it a little bit here tonight. To the extent that Ms. Ide feels like no one reached out to her beforehand, I apologize to her for myself. And I would only ask her to understand that given the necessity of the way this went, you couldn't go around the municipal center alerting people ahead of time because there was an active negotiation between parties. That's just the long and the short of it. Should there have been more communication with you since? Yeah, I mean, if you feel like nobody's talked to you about it, then yes. So if there are people that feel that way in the municipal center, I'm sorry, genuinely. I hope that going forward, there will be more communication with the staff in the municipal center if they feel like they're in the dark.
Anybody else? Okay.
I still have more Q and As. Do you want me to continue, or are we still on Cindy's?
Yeah, let me just do this. I don't want this to be a running diatribe, Mr. Fazio, where people are constantly coming in here. We've got a couple more things to get through tonight, okay? I understand where these people are coming from, but again, if this were a typical meeting, people come up, say the piece, and we'd be moving on with it, okay? I know that the Q&A section doesn't allow or afford us the proper venue, but I have to have some limits on this, otherwise we're gonna go all night, okay? So unless there's a specific question about what we talked about previous, I don't want to have this serial conversation going on between individual board members and members of the public, the Q&A session, that's all. Just want questions, that's it.
Well, that's fine. And it looks like a lot of this seems to be just comments. And so I will, per your direction, skip over them. But Cindy did answer to Ed. So do you want me to read that into the record? Because I think in a public meeting, she would come back up to the podium if we weren't on Zoom, or do you want me to just leave it at that? It's up to you.
If she's got a response to that one question, that's fine, I'll indulge it, but I want to move on, please.
Okay, so from Cindy Ide, we are employees of the town of Grafton. Ed, we deserve to be in the loop. And if we can't be in the loop prior, I understand that. You don't have to explain that to me. It is Tuesday.
No, it's not my role to reach out. My understanding was that was being done by other parties in the room. So you got to direct that question elsewhere.
I'm sorry.
Right, so,
Mr. Chairman, I have one more question that I think is valid, and that's from Ethel Jaggy. How long would it take for a TA to get up to speed? I mean, I can answer that, Ethel. I think in a temporary position, we wouldn't anticipate that a TA would be completely up to speed. It would probably take about 6 months for someone to get comfortable in the position. What we would want is someone who is qualified to do the day in, day out operations of a town and, understands municipal government, has a copy of our charter, works with staff, and has that experience. So I think this is, different than hiring it's different hiring of time TA. So I think if your question is how long would it take a TA to get up to speed, I would guess 6 to 9 months. If you're asking about the temporary position, I don't think that's the goal.
thank you. So just to follow up here, so we'll have this on the agenda for next week, and just remind me again, specifically, what are we talking about next week? I don't want to assume anything. Ms. Roy.
It was my understanding that we would just have more information on the decision we're making, costs associated with both decisions and what it would mean going forward. When we hire an interim, do you need a consultant and what that cost would be, what an interim would cost, advertising, all of those costs associated. And then I don't know how you can talk about that and then not talk about the costs associated with having Becca go into that role. I think all of it's going to be open in discussion at this point, correct?
You talking about for
I don't know.
next meeting? No, you're telling me what I need to have ready for next week's meeting. So I've got the cost for, to have both decisions. How much it would cost to have a consultant in place? Did I miss anything else?
The cost associated with putting Becca into that role.
And I also think, Mr. Chair, the overall cost of this entire action, I don't think you can have those two conversations separately. I think you gotta have it once. I feel like we should have done that tonight, but that's all right.
Yeah, we're gonna try to put a dollar figure on something that I have unknowns on. That's what I'm trying to figure out, is how we're gonna get to that next week. So I have to figure that out to see if most of this is possible. Okay. Was there anything else for next week? Okay, let's move on then. We'll circle back with that. New business, D, vote to sign warrant for 2020 state primary.
I move the board vote to sign the 2020 state primary warrant.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, vote by roll call. Ms. Roy,
Roy, aye.
Mr. Frisbee,
Aye.
Mr. Often. I couldn't hear the vote, Mr. Often. Could you repeat that, please? Mr. DeFazio?
DeFazio, aye.
Often aye.
Peter Carlson, aye. The motion carried. Okay, thank you. When this is available and ready to sign, if you could get down to the municipal center and sign it once it's available for us so we can get that in, that would be fantastic. In addition to that, there were some components of the last meeting that didn't get 100% signed. So if you're one of the people who signed the paperwork last week, just make sure that you sign in all the areas where there's a sticky that calls for your signature on those that we took last week, especially with the with dealing with Adams Road. All right, next up on the agenda, new business, section E, vote to sign India Proclamation Day. So we received a request from Sanjay Goda about typically they have a celebration in Boston, but given the restrictions of COVID, they would like to make use of our the front area of the municipal center where the flagpoles are, and they would like to hoist the Indian national flag for a day that they wanted to ask us to have a proclamation called India Day for August 15, 2020. I can read the proclamation, or Ms. Roy, if you can read it. I think you're on mute.
Respected town manager and board of selectmen, I hope this letter finds you and your family, friends, and you in the best of health and spirits. We all recognize this COVID-19 pandemic has caught us all in our paths as we find new ways to adapt to this new normal for the foreseeable future. One of the most challenging new norms is the restrictions on the number of people gathering in one place at the same time, thus adding a huge question mark on ways to celebrate various celebration milestones, socioculture, and historic occasions, which are traditionally and historically celebrated in a grand way, welcoming a huge public gathering. Who are we? India Association of Greater Boston, known as the IAGB, is the oldest and one of the leading Indian American community organizations in New England. It is a nonprofit, non-political, and non-religious organization serving the Indian American communities in the New England region. The IAGB strives to foster a strong Indian American social culture and community presence in New England. how have we commemorated Indian Independence Day in the past? For the past 60 plus years, the IAGB has been celebrating August 15th as India Day to commemorate India's independence and celebrate India's Indian American rich culture and traditions with utmost vigor and grandeur. For more than 25 years, until 2017, we have celebrated India Day alongside the Charles River at the Hatch Memorial Shell, with cheering crowds of over 12,000 people. From 2018 onwards, we've been doing the same in the heart of Boston City Hall Plaza with an even larger crowd. However, considering the current restrictions, we had to revisit our plan to commemorate this momentous day in a safe way following the new norm. While we have done away with the traditional plan of bringing a huge gathering at one centralized place, we are planning to bring this celebration to as many towns in New England. This will not only help decentralize the celebration, but will also allow people to take pride in the fact that their town recognized and celebrated this historic event, while still being in the safe radar of their hometown and enjoy the culture events we will conduct virtually. We humbly seek your permission to hoist India's flag at Town Common or any convenient place as permitted by the town to commemorate India's 74th Independence Day on Saturday, August 15th, 2020. Should Saturday not work, a weekend is preferred. Friday, August 14th will work as well. And a weekday is preferred, sorry. How do we plan to do it? What will we do? On August 15th, 2020, a few of the town residents will gather for a flag hoisting while following all social distance guidelines. The flag hoisting located as permitted by the town, sing the U.S. national anthem and hoist the U.S. flag, sing the Indian national anthem and hoist the Indian flag. What time? Anytime between 8 and 10 a.m. or any other time that works for the town office. Who provides the flag? The IAGB. Who hoists the flag? The IAGB members representative in presence of one of the town selectmen. What do we need? Your kind permission. While we take pride in originating from our native country, India deemed the world's largest democracy, we are equally as proud and grateful for being able to call the United States of America our home, where democracy and personal freedoms are held at utmost priority. We look forward to hearing back from you with a positive response to our request. With sincere regards, Sanjay. Would you like me to motion, or does anybody have any discussion?
I don't. So there's a proclamation that they want us to vote on tonight. If you want, I can read the proclamation. It was a lot to read. I can read the proclamation if you'd like, Colleen.
Sorry, I thought that was, yes, please.
Proclamation India Day for August 15, 2020. Whereas India, the largest free democratic country in the world, her beauty and rich cultural heritage are unmatched. And whereas the Indian independence movement was led by patriots like Irani, Lakshmi Bai, Mahatma Gandhi, C.R. Das, sorry guys, I'm having a hard time reading names, I apologize. And Sarah Patel, which will later become model civil rights movement around the globe, including movement led by Martin Luther King Jr. in the USA. And whereas on August 15, 1947, India gained her independence 200 years of with peaceful civil disobedience and violence. That movement in turn became a new weapon to fight against inequality and injustice in the world. Whereas the Constituted Assembly of India created a most democratic constitution of its own, taking clues from the British, American, and French constitutions. And whereas a youthful country turning 73 each year, India has shown unsurpassed growth in education, health, culture, and technology since its independence. And whereas India's Independence Day is celebrated by over 1.3 billion people across the country with flag hoisting ceremonies, kite flying, and parades. And whereas India has the largest diaspora of the world, with around 32 million Indians living in the other countries, with over 5 million immigrants residing in the United States, who contribute greatly to the social, economic, and civic health of the nation. And whereas India, a composite civilization, a nation extraordinarily unique as a cultural mosaic of people embracing a prodigious diversity of ethnic groups, religious languages, customs, traditions, clothing, and conditions and natural resources in the chain and unity. And now, therefore, I, Peter Carlson, Chairman of the Select Board of the Town of Grafton, do hereby proclaim August 15, 2020 to be India Day, and encourage all residents to join the Indian community to celebrate and commemorate the 73rd anniversary of India's independence, issued on this 15th day of August 2020. So I just need a motion from the board to sign this. Mr. Roth.
Yep, there's a Q&A question about from Ethel, and I think her question is legitimate. She asks, I think the association has to understand that we're in a pandemic. How many people will be attending? These groups tend to be large. Are we signing off on a big public gathering here?
It is my understanding that there's a request just to hoist the flag at the in front of the municipal center where the U.S. flag in lieu of where the Grafton flag would usually be hung, and that's all I know. As for people showing up, I'm sure that they're going to have to be encouraged to adhere to all state guidelines on social distancing and maintain masks in public areas. Ms. Roy.
Is there someone from the select board for designating to attend this? It sounded like they wanted someone there.
They asked me to attend, and I said that I can make it on the 15th.
I move the board vote to allow the chairman to sign the India Day Proclamation as presented.
Second.
Motion made second. Any discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none. By roll call, Ms. Roy.
Roy, aye.
Mr. Frisbee. Mr. Often.
Often aye.
Mr. Fazio.
DeFazio, aye.
Okay, Mr. Carlson, aye. Declare the motion carried. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. They will appreciate it as well. Okay, next up on the agenda, we have select board reports. Select board member reports. Is anyone have a report want to give?
Yeah, I just wanted to loop back to the goals meeting. So it looks like we're gonna hold it, if I understood correctly, the following week. I'm just trying to get my calendar out here. So the following week would be the 18th.
Yes.
Okay, and I just wanted to update the board that the Lions Club offered at no charge for us to use their facility, which is a nice outdoor facility and pavilion. You know, and we can talk about the logistics of whether we want to order food or anything like that, or lawn games or whatever we want, whatever we want to do. But we have the opportunity for that site. So if the board agrees, I can go ahead and book the date of the 18th. Peter and I had a short discussion about mosquitoes, and that, you know, the possibility of trying to maybe move our meeting a little earlier, like closer to 5 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock. So I didn't know how the board felt about that, but I can work on the logistics with any input from the board. But that's the update so far.
Mr. Often.
So I will be out of town on the 18th. Sorry to throw a spanner in the works. And for some meetings, I would be fine and not being in attendance, but I think this is one that we need together as a board.
Yep, we definitely need all of us. So what about the 25th? So we're not going into September. Would the board be open to meeting on, we don't have a scheduled meeting on that day. Would the board be open to having a goals meeting on the 25th? Or another option is we don't have to do it on a Tuesday. We could pick another day.
I like the idea of picking another day. I know next week on Tuesday when we are meeting, that's going to be a pretty light meeting. So the idea of doing a goals meeting on say like that Thursday, if people have flexibility before anyone goes out of town. I know 2 in a week's kind of tough, but Tuesday should be light, so.
I'm gonna be out of town on Tuesday, the 13th. Um,
Okay, another date suggestion? What about the 12th or the 17th?
12th is good for me.
12th works for me.
Okay with that?
Yep, 12th is good.
Ed, are you okay with that date? Okay, I'll work on confirming the 12th at the Lions Club and around 5 o'clock, if that works for everybody. If not, I mean, I think we can be flexible with the time. I don't think they're going to book anything else that night, but just in lieu of mosquito season, it's a good idea to not wait until 7. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, great. Anyone else have any select board member reports? Thanks, Jordan. Joy?
CIP met last week for the first time, pretty much since the pandemic. We have a couple new members and we're starting to create a plan of how we want to start addressing our capital needs. There's also the issue of there is one more opening on the position. I know Mr. Opton had put in his request for that position. I don't know if it's been advertised properly. It's been open for longer than 14 days, but I don't know specifically what has been done to advertise for it. But since we are the appointing authority, I just thought I would mention that.
So you're saying we have an opening on the board and Mr. Often has showed an interest in being on that board?
Yes.
Okay.
And yep, that's all.
Okay. Anybody else have any select board member reports? Okay. TA reports, Becca?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to ask who the cable committee negotiating rep for the board is. Does anybody know?
That's me.
Okay. Have you touched base yet with the attorney?
Yes, I've spoken to Mr. August on 2 occasions.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure because I wasn't sure where that was because that is coming up. Ratification of that agreement obviously expires, I believe, in September. So we're gonna, I know that the committee, the group is very, very close to a decision. I think a draft may have already been circulated, so that will be upcoming for the board. The RFP for 27 Upton Street is just about ready to get out on the street for people. We're doing a very similar approach that we took to 8 Pine Street with that, putting an RFP out for what we hope to be, likely a multi-use development, some housing, hopefully a little bit of commercial. So that RFP has been drafted and I anticipate getting it on the central register at some point in August. 25 Worcester Street, still on our radar. We're still waiting for the title exam to come back, but the attorney is prepared to draft a deed to convey the property as soon as the title exam is back. So that is, I don't want to say the 18th, but that's what I'm hoping for, given the timeline that Ginny has sort of told us about. So that is definitely coming. I think we've covered everything else at some point tonight, so I'm gonna stop there.
Any questions? All right, move on to correspondence. Ms. Ward, you see a correspondence read?
I do. We received 4 pieces of correspondence this week. Donna Stock wrote stating Tim McInerney should be recognized for his many positive and achievements of his tenure with the town. She indicated his accomplishments are obvious throughout the town. Elizabeth Patch wrote in stating her dissatisfaction with the firing of Tim McInerney. She felt it was a poor decision. Arthur Kinch requested a copy of Mr. McInerney's separation agreement and stated he felt the decision was hasty. And Michael Urban wrote in expressing his extreme disapproval with social media posts by Select Board member Ed Prisby.
So I'm gonna hold off on discussion on Part B. I thank you for about regarding developments appointment for new town manager. We'll be talking about that greatly next week. Is everyone in agreement with that? All right, no objections. Okay. We'll pass over that one and bring it the next Tuesday. So next up I have on here is meeting minutes for June 30th, 2020.
I move the board vote to accept the June 30, 2020 meeting minutes as presented.
Second.
Motion made and second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. By roll call vote, Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Mr. Often?
Often aye.
Mr. Fazio?
DeFazio, aye.
Frisbee? Mr. Frisbee's unavailable.
I'm going to do the other one now. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
I move the board vote to accept the July 21st, 2020 meeting minutes as presented.
Second.
Motion made and second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those by roll call vote, Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Mr. Often?
Often aye.
Mr. Fazio?
DeFazio, aye.
Frisbee?
Yeah.
Peter Carlson, I declare the motion carried 5-0. Okay, I don't have a need to go into.
Sorry, Peter, you were kind of breaking up there. Were you saying there's no need for executive session and you're taking a motion to adjourn?
That's correct.
I move the board adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor by roll call vote, Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Mr. Often?
Often aye.
Mr. Fazio?
DeFazio, aye.
Mr. Frisbee?
Yeah.
All right, thank you, guys. Have a good night.